Good to go, Kelly.
Okay, let's see if I can get back in on the computer. Okay, I can't see anyone but you, JR. At this point, I'm on this little tablet. I'm trying to log in on the computer. I don't know who's in the room, but welcome to the March 24th meeting of the Albany Public Safety, Albany County Council's Public Safety. Okay. This is a technical difficulty day for me. So, hey, welcome, public safety meeting, March 24th. I had all my stuff up here set up. Just for the record, committee members here are Joe Igo, Alfredo Ballerin, Sonia Frederick, myself. The only missing Mr. Hoey. Okay, along with Mr. Hoey, so we're all here from the committee, along with council members Dochette, Fahey, Conti, Flynn, I don't know who that is, and council president Ellis. If there's other folks, I can't see them, along with our staff, Danielle Gillespie, our clerk, and research council, John Raphael Pichardo. Okay, so anyone in here from APD? Or
not yet? Okay.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with you, Mr. O'Shea. But I wanted the APD folks to be in the room because the idea is going to be for you to speak. Then I think they have a PowerPoint presentation or something they want to display to us, and then we'll after they speak, we'll have a discussion. 1 second.
I'm a little confused. So I'm going to present and they're not here, and then I'm going to listen to their presentation?
No, I want them to be here. I was kind of
handling it right now.
It looks like Sergeant Alex Hanson is also trying to get in. She just called me. I will call her back. No, Judy, I want them to be here while you're speaking. I thought that's what I said, but.
Hey, Kelly.
I thought you were telling me to go ahead.
No, hold. Yeah. Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, I just have to ask a question. I saw in the news this morning that we're going to pass this out tonight. And is that something I wasn't aware of? Or
it's something I wasn't aware of either. I don't know who said we're passing it out.
Yeah, they said we're going to probably push it out. I don't have any problem if it's.
I haven't talked to the press.
Was that in reference? It could have been reference to the dirt bike local law, which is the other item on the agenda.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, that we are hoping to do that tonight.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we be looking to pass this out of committee tonight? My ordinance, my law.
Why would do that too?
Well, for me, I mean, and I think I've kind of expressed my opinion on it, having been on both sides of this issue, that I don't know that.
I'm sorry. I guess, you know, other people were saying things about my legislation without there having been any presentation on it, and acting surprised at the idea that it would be passed out of committee. I felt the need to respond to that. But if we're going to start.
No, we won't. We won't. We'll just, I'll be quiet, okay? And we'll see if any other command staff folks are. Tom, you're kind of turned.
I sent it to Deputy Chief Donahue too, so he should be getting it.
Are we
It
maybe
looks like
ready
that-
to talk about dirt bikes?
And I mean, we could do that, just in the interest of time. Let's flip them and discuss local law E.
It's okay, yeah.
And so with that, we'll start with you, Richard.
Yeah, so we had, this is a local law E regarding the dirt bikes, which is the one that's gotten more press coverage. So I think, Tom, what you may have seen is probably referred to this. We did have a pretty extensive discussion at caucus a couple of weeks ago. Sergeant Hansen was there, Brett. So we already had some preliminary discussion on it. And actually, I didn't realize that same night, that same day that we were discussing that same day, there were a number of, I guess, arrests or activity regarding illegal ATV uses that day, including one instance where a school bus was hit in my ward at the corner of Lark and Hamilton. There were no students on board, but I believe that there was some injuries to the driver, but that was a case where, you know, what can happen and what you don't want to happen. The ATV driver, I believe in that case, was not apprehended. So I would like to be able to move this out tonight. I think it sends an important message. Some of it just reinforces what's in there already. I think the impoundment provisions are important, and there is a certain urgency to it. So, you know, if we want to, if there are questions or anything, and Brett is here who worked on drafting it, and he can add anything or answer any questions members might have. And, you know, and Sergeant Hansen is here again as well.
Any, okay, Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, okay. So we did have the meeting.
Can I just, I'm sorry, can I just hold on one, and Danielle, I just got a text from Anita Thayer, who was trying to get on to the Zoom link. I don't know if you had her.
I did have her. I'm going to email her and send out another email to
Okay.
her. And there's another person that signed up to speak.
Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, I brought up at caucus that I had raised some questions, and not to stop this, but I want to go beyond, or what, let me start again. I want to make sure that we're doing what we should be doing in the laws now. And, you know, I don't have a problem with adding more to the penalty, because I think that's more of a way to distract from this type of behavior. But I did send out a bunch of New York State law about driving without insurance, which is a very serious offense. And actually you can go to jail for it for up to a year. And there's some other things in the vehicle law. And I mailed it out to everybody, and it was like crickets out there. I heard nothing back. And I brought this up at caucus, and you said, well, next meeting we'll talk about it. So I just want to have those answers so I can make an informed decision on voting. So that's where I'm at with it.
I don't remember if I saw that, but anyway.
Yeah, and I guess
So
for my part, if I may, I do remember you bringing up something about driving without insurance, Councilmember Hoey. I just did a quick search and I don't see an email to that effect. But I know you had brought that up at some point. In any event, I mean, nothing in this law would change the standard requirements under the vehicle and traffic law that people have to have insurance when they're operating a motor vehicle.
Okay, well, and Am I on? Okay, I thought it was muted. I can send this out, but I know I sent it, I replied all to the email on this. But vehicle traffic law 401, section 1. If a vehicle is uninsured and unregistered, the fines are retroactively $8 for every day up to 30 days. After 30 days, it's $10 a day. Past 60 days, $12 a day. And it goes back to whenever the vehicle was purchased. And, you know, if they don't have a bill of sale or something, it can go back to when it was manufactured. So it can add up to an awful lot of money. It's also subject to a misdemeanor fine of $150 to $1,500 for uninsured operation and up to 15 days in jail. So you want to do a deterrent, throw somebody in jail for a week that they were driving uninsured.
Sorry, Councilmember Hoy, can you just repeat which section this is? I'm sorry.
Sure. It is VTL 401, section 1A.
Thank you.
And in DMV regs, you can't operate an ATV on public highways. So there is laws out there. According to the state, you're not allowed on the public highway with it. I also sent an ATV from New York Gov, and I'll send this out again. It's in my chat because I was talking to a friend of mine who works for Transportation Committee in the legislature. Then there's VTL 2403. Penalties in addition to above start at $250 and approximately $200 in surcharges. And it goes up to how many violations the person's had in the past 18 months. And there's jail time for, in addition to the uninsured jail time, from 15 to 45 days. And then VTL 2288 applies if somebody is a minor. So there is regulations out there. And again, I'm supporting this, but I want to know where we're at with enforcing the state law that's out there. And it's, number one, you can put somebody in jail. Number two, there's pretty hefty fines there. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Okay, I'll Sergeant Alex Hansen.
Yes, Mr. Hoy, you're correct on all of that. There's actually a world of V&T, penal law, even other city code violations that would apply in some of these situations. But I don't think for the most part that they're going to affect this legislation as it stands now. That's a matter that's an internal issue for us, and I mentioned that in our last meeting. It comes down to education and training, and we've got to put something out. I reached out to a couple of our traffic guys, and there's truly a world of violations that we could be writing tickets for or even making arrests for. So that is in the works on our end and getting that information out. And so instead of when we stop these vehicles, instead of writing that one ticket or that second ticket, I mean, we're not even writing the GCO right now as it stands. That's not, we're writing a ticket and most times seizing the bike, but we're not even writing this GCO. And this legislation right now is important, for us to have these penalties in place as a greater deterrent. So
yeah, I don't have any problem with that, Sergeant. What I'm trying to say is there's laws out there that we're not enforcing. And my question is, why aren't we enforcing them? Richard brought up about the ATV hitting the school bus. What if that ATV hit a kid that was getting off the school bus and the ATV driver doesn't have insurance? The parents, how are they going to get, the kid breaks his leg or worse injuries, maybe paralyzed for life, and the person doesn't have insurance. To me, that's a very important law to enforce, that you cannot be operating a motor vehicle on our highways uninsured. I mean, it's, and again, I'm for this legislation. I think the extra, penalties there will be helpful, but why aren't, my question is, I'm a member of this Public Safety Committee, why aren't we enforcing this law to the fullest extent?
Again, I think part of it is a lack of training. Number one, the part of it is you learn through your experience, right? So not just through your training, but through your experience. So the more you do something, the more knowledgeable and proficient you become at it. So it's hard to stop these vehicles, and that just is what it is. And you know, we are strategically planning to make some stops and do some enforcement, but we're not chasing them through the city. So I don't think a lot of the officers here have experience, and there's these vehicles we're dealing with, that, you know, before there was ATVs, motorcycles, and vehicles. There's a world of just new vehicles that are on the road today, that people, including police officers, just aren't familiar enough with, what the restrictions are, what the regulations are, you know, necessary equipment. I mean, I've probably got a good 10, 11 pages of various violations that would apply to vehicles in different situations that we're dealing with, you know, on a regular basis here. And so one of the things I literally just started yesterday, but was trying to break that down into kind of like a cheat sheet, so that guys had it at their disposal when they're out, you know, and find themselves in these situations dealing with these vehicles. But that's, again, those are laws that are already on the books, right? So it's a matter of us enforcing them. And I literally just had this conversation after our first detail 2 weeks ago, was being able to, you know, write more tickets that apply. I mean, there's a world of equipment violations that these vehicles just don't have. That's part of the reason that they're not legal to be on the road. They're not safe. So it's a training thing. We are working on it, and we're hoping to have all the stars aligned, get this legislation through, get our details set on a regular schedule, and have the tools and everything ready for the guys to be very effective in doing this, and for us to make a difference.
Now, Sergeant, my question, and again, I'm harping on this, and maybe we got to bring the chief in, but we can put somebody in jail for driving an uninsured vehicle on the road. Do you think there'll be any effort to do something? We were looking for deterrence, and, you know, or is that too extreme of a deterrent? I don't know. I mean, my feeling is you throw a few people in jail for a week because they were driving uninsured, that the word would get out. And that's what we were hoping for. Word would get out, and these people this will stop, at least in the city of Warren.
Where's the,
you know,
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry.
Did somebody say something?
I believe
I
the
don't,
chief said something. He's got his hand raised, his physical hand.
Yeah. Go ahead, chief.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
yes,
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Councilman Hoy, just to follow with Sergeant Hansen is saying, from my perspective, I don't know if it's the enforcement piece in terms of the writing of the tickets that's our issue right now. Our issue is actually catching these young men and women who are on these vehicles. I've seen it just like you all have. I mean, you know, some days and nights, you know, there's 20, 30, they're driving recklessly. And as Sergeant Hansen alluded, you know, we're very conscious of not adding to the safety issues that we're seeing on our roadways. We don't want to escalate the dangers on our roadways, so we don't want to chase these individuals through our streets. So I think our bigger issue right now, and in terms of our strategy moving forward, is going to be putting strategies in place where we can safely interdict when these things are happening. And we're on track to do so. I don't know if, I got in here a little late, so I don't know if Sergeant Hansen alluded to this, but we've dedicated some officers to be on these details with these ATVs and these illegal road bikes that are out there. They'll be out there 2 or 3 days a week. And they're going to get this information that Sergeant Hansen is talking about. So when we do catch them, you know, we can apply the appropriate sanctions and tickets or whatever it may be. But we've got to safely catch them. And so it's two-pronged. Number one, it's got to be an education and awareness campaign so we can let our community know that these are unacceptable. It's making our streets dangerous. If they know who these people are who are bringing these into the community, let us know. If they know where they're storing them, let us know. So we're gonna need that piece. If they know people who are driving these ATVs on our streets, let them know what the dangers are, not just to other people, but to themselves. So we need that education piece and awareness piece, but we're gonna be very, very strong with the enforcement piece as we move forward also. But as Sergeant Hansen said, very, very challenging issue for us to safely address at this point.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Okay. Did any committee members have, we'll get you, Mr. Igo?
Yes, I'm definitely in favor of any laws we can put together to make the city safer, and the sooner the better. We wait too long, someone's gonna get killed, especially some young kid, and we'd all feel worse then, so let's get something going very soon. I'm okay with this piece of legislation. I'm very in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Igo. Ms. Frederick?
I'm in favor of this as well. Just wondering if they're not physically driving the ATV or the dirt bike and you know where their location is, what can you do as APD in that sense? Like a bike is housed somewhere, it's not being rode. What can you do for enforcement measures there? If you have complaints of that bike doing illegal activities.
Well, there's a couple of things. If we know that it's a vehicle that's been used illegally and has been used in some sort of crime, we can, that's something that we may have. We can potentially confiscate the vehicle, obviously, if we get permission from the courts via a warrant. But also the other thing that we've been doing with these, also when we know where they are, if we don't have reasonable calls to go in and take them at that point, we've set up details where plainclothes details where we can watch and we can watch those vehicles move on the roadways, and then we can safely watch where they go. And then once they stop, in most cases, they're stopping someplace. A lot of times they're stopping at gas stations. They may stop at a friend's house or wherever it may be. Then we can safely approach and intervene once they get to a place where they're not a danger to people in the community. So a couple of different ways. I've seen it go both ways. We've been very successful once we get information where these bikes are being stored. So I know this is a public meeting, and if somebody's watching this, or if the council people here get the word out, if anybody in the community knows where these bikes are being stored, let us know. There are some things that we can do to safely get those vehicles off the roadway.
Thank you.
Okay,
You're welcome.
thank you. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Williams. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my point was going back to Councilman Hoey's question. I just wanted to point out as well that while the police are certainly the first line of defense in enforcing these laws and keeping the dirt bikes and ATVs off the streets when they're used illegally, that's not the end of the story, because then after the police catch them and write tickets or charge them with criminal offenses, then they have to be prosecuted and they have to be put before a judge as well. So when it comes to simple vehicle and traffic infractions, my office prosecutes those within the city. So, I suppose there is some education we could do within my office to keep an eye out at maybe the type of vehicle that's written up on the ticket, to make sure that we're treating these particular offenses related to these particular vehicles with the seriousness that they need to be treated. If they're more serious offenses, then the DA's office handles those. And then the final component is the judges. Even if we decided that we wanted to put these people away in jail, that's ultimately not our decision. We can make our recommendation as the prosecutors, but the decision as to imprisonment or a fine amount, that's ultimately going to be up to the judge. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Manning, I'll get to you during public comment. Just want to go through the rest of the council members and officials here. Mr. President.
Yes, my question, is it illegal to ride an ATV on the street of Albany? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes,
Chief?
Yes.
Chief, I want to hear the chief say it. Yes or no, chief?
Yes.
So it's illegal. Is it
Yes.
illegal to ride a dirt bike on this, a dirt bike, whatever you want to call them, on the streets in the city of Albany? Is that illegal?
Tanya, you want to address the specifics with this?
Is it illegal? Yes or no?
yes.
Okay. So chief, I don't understand your answer to Ms. Frederick's question. If they are on the street, I don't parked, they had to get their reason. So why wouldn't we immediately intervene, cite them and write tickets?
Repeat
Not
your question.
follow them when they get on their bike to see if they're doing anything illegal.
Uh,
The illegal action is the dirt bike and ATV, period. So I'm just confused about, well, we'll follow them. What do you mean if they do the illegal? I thought the illegal activity is riding them in the city.
Okay, you just let me explain this. The question that I understood from Ms. Frederick was if we receive a report of a parked ATV or dirt bike in a private lot, what can we do at that point? And so my answer was, there's a couple of things we can do. If we receive a report that there's in somebody's backyard, for example, there's an
Gotcha.
ATV or
Yeah,
dirt
right.
bike.
Right.
Gotcha.
So
Right.
we can go in and we can confiscate it if we have the legal means to do so. And
On
that's
the
why I
property,
said
yes.
we have it, okay? Or I said, if we don't have the legal means to go in and immediately confiscate that vehicle, then we can watch it covertly, see who gets on it and see if they ride it illegally on our roadways. And if they do, we have officers who are undercover who can follow safely and stop that vehicle once it gets to a place where it's safe to do so. Now, to answer your question even further, the reason why they may not immediately intervene once this person gets on this dirt bike is because if they know that a cop is behind them, now we have a chase going through our city with a ATV and an unmarked police car. So nobody's getting warned now that the danger is potentially coming. So it's safer to follow, watch where they stop, and then intervene and take whatever enforcement action is necessary.
Perfect. So now I missed that part. I heard if they're stopped. So I would beg to say we won't have that issue when they are on the streets in Arbor Hill by the softball field, standing there 20 at a time, standing there with their ATVs. We shouldn't have to wait for them to do Papa Willies up the street like we know they do for the police to do their job and enforce the law. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I want to know. So we don't want constituents calling us this summer talking about the police. We call the police. They're not doing anything. They're sitting out there with all those bikes, with their truck out there. So we won't have to worry about them camping out in Arbor Hill like they've done the last 2 summers. Thank you.
Mr. Ellis, just if I may, the enforcement that we had last year, a lot of it took place on Manning Boulevard. All right, that's where they had, and that's exactly what was happening. When they were off their bikes, we'd send somebody through, and if we saw that they were off their bikes, then that's when we jumped out. And we jumped out on those guys that were off their bikes. When you do that, we can't. There's 50 guys over there. We can't stop all 50 of those guys. Once they see us and figure it out, they're hopping on our bikes and they're going. But that's certainly where we look to make those stops. And it's easier at that location than it is at some other locations in the city.
Yep, I understand. Thank you.
Right. Okay, Ms. Fahey? You're muted. Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
This came up at our caucus, but I wanted to ask about once the bikes and ATVs are confiscated. Can you tell us what happens then? I had heard that they're back out on the streets rather quickly. Is there anything we can do to prevent that? Can you tell me what happens after you confiscate these bikes?
Do you want me to answer that, Chief?
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Tanya.
Okay. When we take those bikes, they're towed, typically towed to the lot of the tow company, and they are not able to retrieve those bikes unless they have to show proof of ownership, and then obviously pay the towing fees. This legislation, gives a pretty hefty redemption fee, so it won't be as easy for them to be able to get those bikes. But yes, in the past, that's part of the reasoning, is my understanding, behind this hefty redemption fee, is that it's not a deterrent. They're right back out on the street with those bikes. There's an issue, and I don't see it addressed in here. And I was going to see if somebody mentioned it. We did talk about it at the last meeting. But the issue of the tow companies holding those bikes, and the disposal of those bikes. So I'm not sure where we are with that, or if any decisions have been made.
Yeah, we might have to adjust the legislation if we can to deal with that, because the issue we're talking about for the members here is that the tow company stores it. Usually they end up getting control of the vehicle through the fees that they assess on a daily basis for storage, and then it gets to a point where the fee is more than the bike, and then so it gets left there, and then the tow company has these auctions, and that's how the vehicles also end up back out on the city street. So how we manage that needs to be considered.
Brett,
Also, I believe.
Brett, is that something we can look at? Destroying, it's personal property. I don't know. Can we? Is that something that's possible, to destroy these things? I don't know. It's just, there's such a problem.
Can I jump in real, if you don't mind? One of the things I brought up is especially a motorcycle needs insurance. Could we insist before the bike is picked up, they show us proof of insurance? It's just.
You're muted, Tom. You muted yourself.
I finished talking. Did you hear my question?
Yeah, you muted yourself while you were talking.
Oh, I apologize. My question was, you got to have insurance to have the dirt bike. Well, it's a motorcycle, to have it on the road. Can we prevent them from picking it up till they show us proof of insurance? That would be a way to make, deter them from just going back out on the road again uninsured.
Mr. Williams or Mr. Pitardo?
I don't know that section of the VTL off of my head well enough to give you a definitive answer, but I think the issue there could be that ATVs and most dirt bikes aren't road legal anyway, so you don't really need, as far as I know, and I could be wrong here, you don't really need insurance to own or operate an ATV because they're not supposed to be ridden on the roads anyway. So you wouldn't really be able to require insurance to release somebody's ATV back for them, because that's not something that's generally insured, I don't think. And I'm happy to be corrected on that. But
yeah, the dirt bike though, you could, that can be. I used to own one. You can go on the road with them. They have to have turn signals and stuff like that. But it could be something that, if it's not, it might be a way we can even push it further so they don't just pull this out. Although by passing this legislation, to me, very expensive for them to get it back. So, but I'm just looking for more stuff to make it more of a deterrent. That's all. Thank you.
Can I just add on though, if they're not going to be able to pay to get them back, pay for insurance, pay to get them back. It still doesn't address the fact that the tow company can later resell them at some point. Is that something we can look at as far as requiring them to be destroyed? Brett, do you know?
That is a question I don't have a good answer to off the top of my head, unfortunately. There are certainly ways that vehicles that have been seized or impounded can be destroyed. I have to do a little more research on what the actual parameters are there, as far as how that can be done and under what circumstances that can be done. Either the APD people here this evening or JR may have more of an answer than I do, but I would have to look more into that personally.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, am I muted? It can be
No,
done.
you-
And it's a matter of us making it so, revising this legislation to include that. But it can be done. One of the issues I see, I don't know. I think the redemption fee is a lot. I've looked at some other legislation in other municipalities. And I think there's a difference between, some of these guys that are terrorizing the streets on a nightly basis and, I don't know, the knucklehead kid who just couldn't wait to get to wherever it is his family goes to ride and pops out on the street for a one-time thing. So, I don't know. I'm in favor personally of increased penalties for subsequent violations. But, I also understand that, time is of the essence and we've kind of got to move forward with this. But the destruction of the bikes, it's a matter of, it can be a civil issue and can be pursued on that end, but it's just a matter of revising the current legislation to read that way and to implement that. I'm in favor of that too, especially when those bikes have been used, in crimes or involved in any criminal activity, which is, information that we're also receiving. So
I understand what you're saying, Sergeant, but there is such a sense of lawlessness about this that it almost justifies taking extreme action, but I don't know what other folks think. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
if
No,
I
I
could just
agree.
really quickly, I
I
did
agree
look
with you,
into,
Kathy.
Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
sorry, I did look into pursuing civil asset forfeiture in relation to bikes and ATVs that we seized, but that would be a quite a bit more involved way to go about this, at least as far as administratively and legislatively. So it's something we could look to do in the future maybe, but with time of the essence as the way it sort of is with this legislation, I thought it best. And I had agreement from others in my office that it was best to just move forward with the legislation as it was for now.
Right.
So-
And go ahead, Sarge.
if we go forward as it is now, then I guess we still need to determine how we're going to dispose of these bikes when they're not picked up. Allowing the tow companies to sell them is just going to put them right back on the street. We've seen that already.
Right, but just my recollection of that process is that by the time the storage fees, climb through the roof, it typically equals roughly the price of whatever the property is, the value of the vehicle, what car, boat, or bike. And so they have, I would say that in that instance, maybe they have a right to it, unless we intervene and put something in there to spell that out. But for now, what we're trying to do is get this law in play. And for all the extra stuff that we're talking about right now, we can handle and make those adjustments as we move forward. So we can do what we can do now and then make those adjustments. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to the point that Council President was making. You know, Monday through pretty much Sunday, you know where they're at, and it's like, you know, during those times, you very rarely ever see police presence over there. And when you start seeing people with trailers, and that has the makings and the markings of bikes. So like, it's not like, you know, I understand we don't want to get in a high-speed chase. I understand safety in that regard, but I also understand what my colleagues are saying, because now when I drive up the street, I'm kind of looking out and listening out for that type of stuff, because you just have to be proactive with it, because it could come out of anywhere. So I think that the juices get flown when they can go to a certain spot and you know, conduct themselves in a manner like that. And a lot of times, you know, what we see is people going to and from that hot spot. So I think that to say, and maybe that is Manning Boulevard, you know, the street name that was called out. I just would like to see something done about that particular area over there, because it's a lot of kids over there running, and you know, I don't think I've ever heard of an accident. You know, I've heard of cars getting hit, but never heard of a human getting hit. So, you know, we have been fortunate in that regard. But I just think that if we had a presence in those situations, I think that it would filter out and into other, because it will send a message clear that that's not going to be tolerated this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. O'Shea?
Yeah, so I went on the DMV website. There was a question about insurance.
Private property.
And it says you may not operate any ATV anywhere in New York State except on your own property unless it's covered by liability insurance. And then that would be on somebody else's property. And then it sets forth how much is required in terms of liability. You must show proof of this insurance upon the request of a judge, the police, or a person claiming to have suffered injury or property damage.
What VTL provision is that, Councilman Doshit?
I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, what did you say?
I was just wondering what VTL provision that was, so I could read up on it.
It does. I'm just on the DMV website.
Okay.
You know, their question and answer regarding ATVs. They have some brochure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. Ballerin?
Thank you. I do think we have to come up with an agreement or some type of understanding of what happens to these vehicles once they're impounded and once the current owner says they don't want it anymore. Because I think it's a legitimate concern that if they get, you know, resold back onto the market for $1,500 or $2,000, then this really is pointless, because you can put a $3,000 fine, get them off the streets, but someone can then buy them right from the person that impounded them for $1,500 or $2,000. Then you're really not addressing the issue of trying to get them off the streets. I'm hoping that it's going to address the issue of changing behavior, seeing such a hefty thing. But if there's a loophole, then we're really not addressing the concern. We really have to have a discussion of what is it that we can do to ensure that they're not resold in our community in the capital district, or that they're dealt with in a way that, you know, either they're dismantled and sold for parts, you know, but that they're not being cycled back into the rotation.
So, and I guess with what Mr. Ballerin just said, Mr. Conti, so it gets confiscated, goes to the tow company, it's there, waiting for someone to come get it. When no one comes to claim it with that redemption fee, what do you see happening? I mean, the fine is still going to be the fine. That $500 or whatever part of the fine is still intact, correct? And then, but if it just stops at that point, they're still going to be on the hook for that. But if they don't go get it, then the amount of money is, like Mr. Ballerin said, is moot, a moot point, and then it just kind of, so we gotta think about how we handle that. And of course, the city's not in the business of like collecting dirt bikes or ATVs, and we got no place to store them, and that's, I'm sure, a road that we don't want to go down.
I defer to
thoughts.
council, but I'm wondering if there's something that can be done in terms of contracts with tow companies in terms of how handling these vehicles in particular, as opposed to other vehicles that are seized and that the tow company has. If there's an issue, you can work it out with our contract.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that certainly could happen. That's obviously a conversation that we would have to have with the contracted tow companies and impound lots. And I am not the person in Corporation Counsel's office who tends to work with those contracts or have those conversations with people, but it's certainly something a conversation we could have, something we could look into.
So part of the question also tonight is, whether or not the committee is ready to move this out and it'd be ready for the April 5 meeting, or are we talking about holding it for further discussion or moving it forward and, addressing any loose ends as we move forward?
I think we need to move forward with this. I mean, as a member of the committee, that would be my vote.
Make the motion.
I think y'all need public comment before y'all move forward with it.
Yeah, we're not there yet. So all the members done speaking, we'll let Ms. Manning speak. Okay, all right, go ahead, Ms. Manning.
Hi, I came for a different law, but I'm sitting here really shocked listening to all you guys. My name is Lauren Manning. I'm here as the resident right now. Later on, I'll be here professionally. But right now, this is not professional because I live right there on Manning Boulevard where you guys are talking about. And yes, it's a nuisance. Yes, it's even dangerous. There have been times where I said, I'm going to kill one of these kids on the dirt bikes. All it's going to take is one of them to fall and I'm going to run them over, and I would probably be traumatized for life. It is a problem. They're noisy. It does mess with my quality of life, but the answer is not the criminal justice system. I mean, I imagine that this was literally the conversation when the laws were created for the drug wars. Let's arrest our way out of this. Y'all are about to get tens of millions of COVID dollars. Why don't you find some place for these kids to ride these bikes? I would rather see them riding these bikes than shooting each other. They tell y'all every day they have nothing to do. Why is it always let's incarcerate them? Let's find them. Who's going to be disproportionately impacted? Poor Black people. Those rich white kids that come in from Gloversville, they have that money for that fine. They will get their bikes back. Who do you think the judges are going to actually sentence to do time after you arrest them? Not those rich white kids coming down from Gloversville. And y'all really need to step back and work with the community to address this problem and not try to arrest and fine and ticket your way out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Okay, so with that, thoughts?
Can we respond to that?
Yeah, that's what,
We should respond to that because I'm pretty sure the sergeant will tell Miss can we respond to that or?
We can, I apologize, I was off muted for a minute and not paying attention, but I do get the gist of her saying, why do we want to lock people up and incarcerate them? That wasn't my approach or thought to this. I don't think in general we were, everyone was saying, let's lock.
But I don't even want to.
That conversation was
but-
taking place tonight. I know it's
Yeah,
not in
but
the law, but we're going there.
Yeah, but the context of what way Miss Manning stated, she stated as if these are young kids, and they're not.
Yeah,
these are
Neither
grown
are
adults.
the people shooting each other. I live here, Corey. I see them every day. Some of them are young. None of
Some
them are
are.
my age or your age. They're all younger than most of us on this call. I literally see them every day. And I get it. A lot of them don't even look like they're from Albany. But why can't y'all take some of that COVID money and find some place for these folks to ride, since this is clearly a recreational activity for them?
Miss
It
Manning,
might even bring some
Miss
money.
Manning,
okay,
Miss Manning,
all right.
like I said, I'm going to leave it here. If you talk to the police department, they will tell you this is not a recreational issue. They are illegally taunting the police. They're illegally disturbing the peace on purpose. This is not, this issue is bigger than people wanting to ride recreational. It is not like that. So if you talk to the police, they will give you, I guess, I don't know the term, but they will give you the breakdown of what they're seeing, the people who are doing it, the riders who are doing it. It's not young kids who are just looking to have a good time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Sergeant Hanson, Chief, any of you care to address that or speak on it?
Well, I will say that I believe that we do need to have a conversation in regards to people that ride for the sport, because you know what, we may not take 100% of the people off that's currently riding on the street, but you know, we may take a significant amount, and that's progress too. And then also, as I said before, it opens up the avenue for the city and a part of the community that hasn't been connected to have that type of moment where consideration was shown for people who want to do this in the right manner. So yes, the people that are riding down Central Ave and riding through streets, that's a whole different conversation. That and that's the conversation that is not only dangerous for them, but it's dangerous for many others. So you can't take a soft approach to that, because the soft approach that we have taken thus far is the problem is growing. So I fully heard what Ms. Manning was saying, because part of it is, we know people personally that always had dirt bikes, and it was places for them to ride, and those places have been taken away from them. So when you take the place that people grew up riding away from them, they're going to ride somewhere. So that's the conversation, because at one point they could ride, and they did ride in Tivoli Lake. So.
Yep. Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Johnson. But I would say they were riding in Tivoli Lake, but they weren't supposed to be riding in Tivoli Lake. And it was less of an issue because it was off the beaten path. Not okay, but riding in the street and riding in Tivoli is two different things. And they were not supposed to be riding. They weren't riding there legally. So that's that. But also what I'd like is we're having a partial conversation about providing a space for riders. You know what I'd like for when we have one of these meetings, for one of those riders to actually send comment in, or maybe jump in the meeting and express their desire to have a space created for them to do that. I mean, it would take a lot to do that, but I mean, that would be helpful also for me as a member dealing with this issue. That's just my thought on it. Chief or Sergeant Alex Hanson, did you guys want to address Miss Manning's comment, or? or say anything about it? If not, we can.
Yeah, Kelly, I just like to say, you know, as I frame the police response to this, said, it's a two-pronged approach for us. Education and awareness is one component of it, and that's the preventative part of it. And, you know, Ms. Manning talked about doing some things to help to prevent or avoid having to have these confrontations with these young men and women or old men and women, whoever it may be, who are on these illegal vehicles. So education and awareness is a key piece of the police department's strategy. Enforcement is also a key piece of it.
Thank you for that, Chief. So with that, on this, just if members of the committee want to speak, I know some already did, because we got to move on to the next piece of legislation. I support this, and I heard a number of other members say they supported it also. I guess we move forward and make, we can move forward and make any of those changes that need to be changed that we were talking about. Yes, I would
Make a
entertain.
motion that this piece of legislation is reported out of committee with a favorable recommendation.
Second,
And
Mr. Hoey's the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Was that an aye, Mr. Ballerin?
I was trying to make a comment before we
Okay.
got, that's why I have my little hand up.
Okay, some people put hands up and they've been up for the last 10 minutes, but good. That's why I have Mr. Bachardo do this for me most of the time, because I miss people. So go ahead, Mr. Ballerin. Your comments are important.
Well, my comment was to, you know, piggyback on a little bit of what was said in public comment. I do think it's unfair that, you know, there are going to be some who have the economics to be able to get their vehicles back. But I also think it's unfair that we have individuals coming in with trailers that have the economics now to be able to get to be able to ride anywhere they want. So they have the resources to be able to ride where they want, but they're still choosing to ride in our city, in our neighborhood. They're still choosing to disturb our residents. So I'm hoping this is going to be more of a deterrent to help change behavior and to make people ride where it's safe, ride where it doesn't disturb our neighbors, and they have the means to do so. So hopefully this will be a deterrent for them not to come to our neighborhoods and create habit, for lack of a better word.
Thank you, Mr. Ballerin. So is that a yes or no? Your vote? I didn't hear your vote.
That's a yes, sorry.
That's a yes. Thank you, Mr. Ballerin. The motion passes out with a positive recommendation. Okay, so next, we'll have local law C by Mr. O'Shea. So, Mr. O'Shea, I'll have you start.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. So I, like many other people, were very upset last summer when tear gas was used not once, but twice on residents, on people in the city, and in residential neighborhoods. We learned that people were impacted inside our homes. I've been here for I've been a resident of Albany for 45 years, and I'm not aware of another instance in which tear gas has been used. I have participated in many demonstrations in my 45 years here, some that got out of hand and tear gas was not used, where tensions were high. I, like many other people, am also concerned about the escalating violence that I see. against people of color, communities of color. And it's not just out there, it's here in the city of Albany. People talked to me many years ago about their concerns about the militarization of the police, and I didn't really get it. I didn't understand it. But as time has gone on and I've seen new equipment being used and new tactics being used that have not been used previously while I was on the Common Council, I'm taking some ownership of that. And that's why I've introduced this legislation. I'm aware of the fact that other communities have introduced or adopted legislation severely restricting or banning the use of tear gas. There's legislation in the state legislature in which this particular legislation closely follows. This legislation would require the chief of police to adopt a policy banning the use of tear gas and rubber bullets, essentially, in the city of Albany. But it would not impact the ability of the police to use pepper spray under circumstances in which they can be reasonably assured that the pepper spray is not going to affect a near bystander. It is to address somebody committing a crime. We've seen instances where various tactics have been used, escalating tactics have been used against people with mental health issues that raise significant concerns. And certainly last year, the irony cannot be lost on us that the first time that I'm aware of tear gas being used used in our city was when people were protesting the treatment of communities of color at the hand of police, that people were angry about that. And the response is, oh, we'll use tear gas. The executive order talks a lot about de-escalation, and the guidance documents talk about de-escalation and the demilitarization of police. And now we, as a city, have adopted this report. And I heard a lot of people talking while that was being discussed, and we had some concerns about it, that we wanted to honor the work of the people in that collab that worked on that. A lot of people put in a lot of time and energy, and the report in 2 different work groups talked both about the demilitarization of police and, in one case, the outright banning of tear gas, and in another case, restricting it from being used in a residential area. Frankly, I don't know how you decide what's a residential area. There are potentially significant health effects from this. People walking down the street, maybe with their children, in their car, passing by, in their homes, should not have to be afraid of the police. This evening, somebody commented about support anything that makes the city safer. I don't feel like the city was made safer with the use of tear gas last summer. I think it made people angrier. I feel like the people that were there were not safer. I feel like the people in the neighborhood were not safer. I feel like rather than de-escalating the situation and getting it under control, we wound up with a situation where businesses all across the city were being rampaged. Whether that was a direct effect or not, I don't think we can sit here and say it, but is it possible? Is it probable that that was a direct offshoot of people being upset because of the way the police treated people, which was what they were protesting. So I would like this committee and the entire council to respect the people who worked on this collaborative, respect the work product. We adopted that without changes. The police did not come and talk to us about any concerns. This product was the result of a collaborative headed up by the mayor and the chief of police. No changes were asked. We were asked to pass it expeditiously back on February 8th, as is. No discussion. In addition to supporting the people in the collaborative, I want us to respect the communities of color who were most affected by this and who have spoken up about this and other issues. People talk about demilitarizing the police. Well, there can be no more concrete example of what we can do to demilitarize the police than stopping the use of tear gas, especially after we have examples of it being used twice in communities predominantly occupied by people of color. So I am asking members of the committee to pass this out with a favorable recommendation. And I will be asking the entire council to support this.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. With that, Chief, I will turn it over to you and your folks. We'll hear from you, and then committee members will get to ask questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. So well, I have members of my staff here with me, and I have in particular Detective Committe, who will go over some information to put some context to this discussion. And just to go to the end of what the final recommendation and position of the police department will be on this, it's that a ban of tear gas in this case will make this community less safe. It will give the police department fewer tools to address major incidents that are happening, that could happen, that have happened, and that could happen in this community. And as Detective Committe will talk about in this presentation, which by the way, he'll talk about exactly what these chemical munitions are, what the policies are within the police department for the use of those, what the limitations are, the de-escalation components to it, and exactly when and why those chemical munitions were used on those two occasions last summer. And as the committee here and other members of the community will hear, those chemical munitions were used at a time when these were not peaceful protests. These were not peaceful people who were demonstrating for a cause. These were individuals who were actively assaulting police officers and actively damaging property to the point where we had officers who were being subjected to Molotov cocktails, to bricks, commercial grade fireworks. And as Detective Commisso will talk about, when we are in a situation like that, the police response is very limited. And it can range anywhere from the use of deadly force to stop individuals who are trying to hurt or kill other people or doing nothing. So Detective Commisso will talk about where these chemical munitions stand in terms of managing serious incidents. Let's call it what they were, riots, massive incidents where people are trying and in many cases succeeding and causing major damage and hurting other people. This is a tool. And as Detective Commisso will talk about, this is a tool that is, if taken away, it severely limits what the police department can do in a situation where mobs of people are determined to destroy property and hurt other people. And with that, I'll turn it over to Detective Commisso in his presentation.
I just want to introduce myself. We're going to actually share the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to screen share it with you so you can follow along here. So let me know if you guys can see that in a moment here. Just let me know. While we're working on that, I just want to introduce myself. Detective Michael Commisso with the Albany Police Department. I've been a member of the Albany Police Department for approximately 14 years. 13 of those 14 years, I've been a member of the Emergency Services Team, where I served in various roles to include chemical agent instructor. So today I want to go over the use of chemical munitions and riot mitigation and de-escalation. And I hope this PowerPoint can clear some uncertainties up and clear any questions that you have up. And if at the end, I would, open this up for questions. I'd be happy to hear from you guys. So our goals for today, can everybody see that? The presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so for our goals today for this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of the type of chemical and less lethal munitions used by the Albany Police Department. We're going to go over the effects of the chemical agents and the less lethal rounds. We're going to talk about physical effects versus psychological effects. We're going to be talking about the training that we undergo as the Emergency Services Team in Albany Police Department undergo through to complete training and be proficient at chemical agents. We're going to talk about our deployment success on previous deployments. And we're going to talk about decontamination of chemical agents. But first, I want to talk about the Albany Police Department's vision, our mission, and the police department's core values. It's these values which are our guiding principle that is the basis for all of our decision-making in the police department. This is the what of our operation. So we're going to jump right into it. Now, I'm not a scientist, so forgive me if I can't pronounce these scientific names here, but we're going to make it easy for everybody. We're going to go down to the type of chemical agents based on their acronyms. So the first one is CN. It is classified as an irritant, and we're going to talk about all these specifically in a little more in depth. The second one is CS, which is the most commonly used by the Albany Police Department, which also has a nickname of tear gas, OC, and smoke. So I just want to touch base on the CN portion of that. We don't utilize CN within the Albany Police Department. And I'll go in depth of why we don't use it. But first, we're going to talk about the CS chemical agent. So CS was developed in 1928 by British scientist Carson and Stratton, and that's why it's named CS. It's named after their initials. It's classified as an irritant, and that's what it's designed to do, to cause irritation, which we're going to talk about. Law enforcement adopted CS in 1965, but the Albany Police Department didn't adopt it until 1988, and that's when we were trained in CS, and we're trained in a chemical environment. So the training consists of a PowerPoint presentation, classroom portions of it, and then practical application. During those practical applications, we are subjected to exposure of the chemical agent, specifically in this case, CS. We are trained to operate without utilization of gas masks. We are trained to place our gas mask on in a chemically induced environment, and subsequently clear our gas masks in a manner to allow us to operate proficiently through an operation. So we have firsthand knowledge on its effects. We have confidence in its effects. We have confidence that is not lethal. And after a short period of time of decontamination, which we're going to go over, those effects subsided. So nationally, with the use of CS, nationally, there are no known deaths associated with the proper use of CS. With the Albany Police Department, we have over 150 interior deployments of CS. Now, we're going to go over the difference between interior deployment of CS and exterior and the differences, okay? So in the 32 years of the Albany Police Department establishing SOP or policy for use of CS and being trained in the proficient use of CS, the only two deployments, real life deployments we utilized were during the nights of the riots from May 30th to June 1st. So in 32 years, we had our first two operations were riots, and that's where first time we used open air chemical munitions. Less lethal weapons range from police batons, which are deployed by all police officers. These can be like your Coca-Cola wooden batons or your expandable batons. Other less lethal options that are utilized are tasers. We deploy those on all EST operations. And again, these tools are used in a manner to de-escalate a situation, because we want everybody to be as safe as possible, okay? Other less lethal impact munitions, our first impact munitions would be like a sponge round or a beanbag round, which is launched from a 40 millimeter launcher, which we're going to go in depth later on. And our first utilization of these sponge rounds were the night of the riots. Forgive me, there's a typo on the date on May 5th, 2020 for the first utilization. It was actually May 30th. I apologize for that. We'll make those changes. All right, so we're just going to talk about, I'm going to try not to bore you to death here with the chemical stuff here, but CS, again, it was discovered in 1928 by the British chemist, adopted by law enforcement in 1965. So they're classified in three different topics: odor, color, and chemical classification. So the odor of the CS gas, once it's released, is a pungent and peppery smell. It is color-coded blue. The reason why we color code these is for easy identification. And again, it's a chemical classification as an irritant. The reaction time for for a person to feel a sensation of the irritant is between 3 to 7 seconds. And everything is going to, there's going to be things that affect the manner and how the reaction time, such as terrain, wind direction, the mental status or physical condition of a person. So after about 5 to 15 minutes of the subject being removed from that chemical induced environment and put into fresh air and started the decontamination process, between 5 and 15 minutes after that is when a subject will start to come back to normal. So these are the actual munitions themselves, okay? On the left here, you'll see, on my left, you're gonna see a what's described as a 37 mm Ferret Round. These rounds are a barricading penetrating projectile, which are launched from a platform specifically for these types of munitions. And these rounds are typically used for indoor operations. Now you might ask, what operations would you use them inside? Well, we have what we call a barricaded gunman. A barricaded gunman is when we get a call for service. Let's use an example for shots fired in an area in the city of Albany. And we have several witnesses stating to us, I observed the person who conducted the shots fired, who did the shots fired, run into this home and never exit. So we would do a few things. We would surround the house and we begin a call out procedure. At that point, if the emergency services team was deemed necessary, if there was enough cause, an emergency services team was deemed necessary, emergency services team would respond to that location. And after a period of calling out, using our crisis negotiators to try to reach out to that person and de-escalate the situation prior to using any type of chemical munition. With all those avenues exhausted, at that point, we would get approval to use chemical CS. And we introduced that using this Ferret Round. And they're used to be launched through the window, breaking the window and dispersing a quantity of liquid CS throughout that home, okay? The flameless tri-chamber in the middle is specifically for interior use. And this is designed as it says on the canister, flameless. It is safe for interior use. It is by methods of CO2, it burns off the gas, so there's no ignition. Now on the right-hand side, you'll see something that says an instantaneous blast, and those are used for exterior use only. And these are both the canisters in the middle and the left, or the right, excuse me, are used by hand deploying, meaning that they're tossed either underhand or overhand, depending on the situation. So in a similar fashion, there's just different types of chemical agents. So we would have CS in the same fashion as these canisters. We have OC or OC-CS blend. Again, the Ferret Round, it comes in a Ferret Round and also a instantaneous blast, which would be used for exterior. Just a little bit about OC. It was developed by the military in 1930s, widely adopted by the US law enforcement in 1990. Non-toxic food grade OC formulation came out in 1993. And it doesn't have an odor except for the propellant. So different manufacturers might have a different odor, but they all have the same color code of orange, again, for easy classification and identification for the officers. And it's classified as inflammatory, which would be different from the CS, which is irritant. And also, OC is also considered pepper spray as another term, which all officers carry in a liquid form. The forms that you saw on the previous slide either can come in a liquid form in this slide. They come in a liquid form for a Ferret Round, penetrating round, or they would come in a powder, micropolarized powder form, which would be utilized for the hand deployment. We also utilize smoke. Now, smoke has a wide range of utilizations. It acts as a de-escalation tool prior to chemical agents actually being used in riot control. Okay. In my opinion, it is the biggest deterrent and biggest de-escalating tool because of the psychological effects that it has on a group that is rioting. So I'll use, for example, specifically the nights of the riots, which I was both present for both evenings. Smoke was deployed prior to chemical agents being used. And with that, I observed people that were deterred by just seeing the smoke because they knew that the irritant was possibly coming their way. Okay, so that helped us use less chemical agent than we had to. When smoke is employed with a combination of the chemical agent, which is the powder, is actually lighter than the smoke. So what happens is it attaches itself to the smoke, and the smoke carries the propellant or propels the chemical agent towards the targeted location. Again, we can use less chemical agent with the utilization of smoke. Also, smoke is utilized to obscure officers' movements, specifically on when we had the second night of the riots here on Henry Johnson Boulevard. Two of our officers got surrounded on First Street and Henry Johnson Boulevard. Specifically, a group of individuals attempted to light a mattress on fire and place it underneath their patrol vehicle. And this was all on video. I'm sure some of them seeing some head shaking. I'm sure some of you observed this. And they are actually smashing out the patrol vehicle windows and surrounding those officers. We utilize smoke to obscure our movements, obscure the emergency services team movements and other officers, uniform officers' movements to that location. So the crowd didn't turn on us and wasn't able to see us and turn on us and start throwing rocks and stuff at us. All right, so the types of deployment platforms. So you guys heard me say about the Ferret Rounds and being launched through a 40 millimeter or 37 millimeter launcher. Now, the picture on the right is it's a black launcher. It's a break action. It comes in either a 37 millimeter or 40 millimeter platform. And it is designed to have one single use, and then the officer would have to reload that with another munition. So that is one method of deployment, and that type of deployment is beneficial to the officer and subjects for de-escalation because we are allowed to create distance. So we have distance versus time. So we don't want to be so far away where if we utilize this platform to use an impact munition on somebody, we don't want to be too far away where they have time to recover, but we don't want to be too close to cause any injury. And second, on the right, you can see a pair of gloves and hands. Inside that, that gentleman is holding a hand canister. So that's how we would pull the pin and then deploy that type of canister. So I just wanted to give you an overview of how it would look. So let's talk about the psychological and physiological effects of chemical munitions, specifically CS. So within 15 to 20 seconds of being exposed, this is when you're feeling the most of the tip of the irritant. So you're going to experience a pricking, peppery, burning sensation to the skin, especially in the mouth, the nasal airways, and the eyes. If the individual that is exposed was sweating, I know during training, if we were sweating on the back of the neck, any moist areas, it attaches itself to that, and that's where you feel most of the burning sensation. You also would feel lacrimation. Lacrimation is the tearing of the eyes. So this is where it gets its name, tear gas. Rhinorrhea, which is the uncontrollable dripping of the nose, mucus dripping from the nose. Blyrospasm, which is the uncontrollable blinking of the eyes. So this is why when people are exposed to this, they would feel the temporary effect of not feeling like they can't see or they can't breathe. Tightness of the chest is also part of it. Feeling of suffocation, shortness of breath, coughing, sneezing. So extreme exposures with this can result in vomiting, nausea, or vesiculation. Now, vesiculation is the blistering of the skin. Now, these studies that have been conducted by the military and manufacturers of the chemical agents were conducted in a completely sealed container. I can't stress that enough, that none of these studies were done in an open area. And over the period of 14 to 16 hours of continuous exposure, again, in a closed container, that these effects of vesiculation can be seen. So there's been no studies or no reports of open air, somebody having these type of issues in an open air concept. So like I said previously, between 5 and 15 minutes of a person being removed from that chemically induced environment and brought into fresh air, the person is starting to feel back to normal. The psychological effects, the person is going to feel disoriented, confused, and anxiety, fear, and panic. Now, these types of psychological effects are some of the desired results, and I'm going to go into talk about this in the next slide, right? So I'll talk about our interior desired effects for deploying chemical munitions first. All right, we have the 5D principle. So we would utilize this again, like the example I gave before for a barricaded gunman, someone who was shooting outside, ran into a house, and now the house is surrounded and emergency services team is there, okay? We exhausted all efforts. So we decide and the command is given to utilize a chemical agent. So we use the 5D principle of why we want to use it, okay? We want to either distract that person, we want to detect that person if we don't know where he is in that building, he or she. We want to disorient, we want to disperse that person from a particular, either a particular room, a particular area of that house, and ultimately, we want to dislodge this person. And that's our ultimate goal, to dislodge this person out, and so we can take him to custody safely and we can continue on with our mission. So in a similar fashion with our desired outcomes for deploying agent for outdoor is number one, to de-escalate, right? We want to deter people from continuing tumultuous and violent behavior. We want to stop the assaults on police officers, stop the burglary or robbery or assaults on other persons, which we all observed personally the nights of the riots. We want to disorient that person. This assists us in using less force than if we didn't have CS. We also want to distract that person and disperse them from that area. Now, with that being said, dispersing, we have tactical plans when utilizing CS in an outdoor environment. We want to give that group a means of egress. We don't trap them in by deploying chemical munitions or CS on all sides. We want them, that is our ultimate goal, to disperse. So we utilize it in a fashion to give them a means of egress, maybe two means of egress if the terrain dictates. Again, that is our ultimate goal. So I just want to touch back on what I think is very important for this presentation. So long-term exposure, the CDC describes long-term exposure or exposure to a large dose of riot control agent, especially in an enclosed setting, may cause severe effects such as the following: blindness, glaucoma, immediate death due to severe chemical burns to the throat and lungs, respiratory failure, possibly resulting in death. Again, in an enclosed area, these studies have been done and the CDC has this, and this was taken from the CDC website. Prolonged exposure, especially in again, enclosed areas, may lead to long-term effects such as eye problems, scarring, again, glaucoma. If the subject is removed from that, the exposure or removed from that chemical environment, these long-term effects are unlikely to occur. Yes, again, they're unlikely within before the 14 to 16-hour period. So I want to talk about how we decontaminate or instructed people to decontaminate. So for interior use, if we're using the chemical agent inside, we once we take the home is secure and is safe for us and to move about freely, we will open up all the windows and doors to allow for ventilation. We utilize fans provided for us by the Albany Fire Department to assist in a faster ventilation period. So we ventilate that for a period of time. And then whoever we're turning the home over to, every case is going to be different, but we were advised to close all the windows and doors, turn up heat to 95 degrees approximately if it's applicable. And this assists in burning off any leftover agent that the ventilation period did not capture, okay? Any food or anything that was left out should be thrown away, discarded. So for personal decontamination, we instruct to first remove that person from the chemical environment into fresh air. Do not use water at this time to wash off the agent from the skin, as this will it reactivates the agent. Okay, again, like I said before, it attracted to moisture, so this can reactivate the agent. So what we recommend is to remain in fresh air for a period of the time until the agent, you feel the sensation of the burning sensation or any other the effects, desired effects, to dissipate. After this is complete, a person may shower. Now for clothing, we recommend that the person, if applicable, remove the clothing and place that exposed clothing outside in the sun, where it can see the sun and get ventilation. After that ventilation period, the clothing can be washed, and we recommend obviously to wash that separately from anything else, just in case. So now we're going to talk about kinetic energy munitions, also known as kinetic energy non-lethal munitions or less lethal munitions. These are de-escalation tools fired from a specific platform, and that platform you saw was the 37 millimeter and 40 millimeter launcher. Okay, those are those platforms that we utilize to use these type of munitions as well. They are intended not to cause serious penetrating injury or death, but to influence the behavior of a suspect or subjects by means of compliance, by introducing physical discomfort or pain. Generally, this was generally used by law enforcement officers needing to quickly gain control of crowds or individuals in situations of unrest and aggressiveness, which we all personally experienced on May 30th to June 1st. So these munitions are not designed to penetrate a person's skin. They're no different than an officer utilizing a baton or expandable baton. So some of the types of examples that we use for these type of non-lethal munitions are a 40 millimeter sponge round. Now, it is called a 40 millimeter because of this diameter, And it is a rounded foam projectile that is placed at an intended target. So less lethal weapons are primarily designated to temporarily disable or stop non-compliant persons without killing, thereby provide law enforcement personnel with an alternative to lethal force. So with that being said, without these types of munitions, without CS, without these types of sponge rounds, officers that were subjected to getting rocks thrown at them, subjected to fireworks and improvised explosives, Molotov cocktails being thrown at us. Based on that, on those types of actions that were conducted on us, per Article 35 of the Criminal Procedure Law, we are justified to use deadly physical force. But with these de-escalation tools, it allows officers to use less force than necessary. So I'm going to show you a slide of where the intended target areas are for these sponge rounds and or beanbag rounds. So you'll see different shading. I hope the shading, you can see it clearly on your end. But on my end, I'm looking at the head and chest area to be black, arms and belly, pelvis to be a whitish gray color, the private area to be black, and the legs and shins to be a darker gray. Okay, so where our intended targets are where the officers are trained to aim on these individuals that are acting tumultuous or violent for these riot purposes are specifically the thighs, buttocks, calves, and shins. Now the calves, the thighs and buttocks are the most desirable area because it has the largest muscle mass, and we get the most campaign compliance out of that, where we can incapacitate a violent subject from stopping him from him or her from doing something. The dark shade areas, the black areas, are the last resort, and this again, this can only applies if the Article 35 of the Criminal Procedure Law applies. So if there is no other resort, this is the last resort. If there's no other option, and that officer that has a less lethal munition deems that Article 35 applies, he or she may utilize that in those intended areas, in those darker areas. Physiological effects of the sponge rounds and or less lethal rounds are similar to the chemical munition effects. It creates anxiety, it creates fear and panic. So if there's a group of people and we deem reasonable cause to deem that one person, we have to stop his or her behavior. The crowd observing that person getting struck with a impact munition might deter them from continuing doing what they're doing. Again, it's a de-escalation tool. Without these tools, officers would not have another choice, but to use deadly physical force specific to the riots that we experienced on May 30th and June 1st. So I just want to touch on some of the commonly used terms that I've seen in this petition and throughout this presentation, or not this presentation, but through this petition. Chemical weapons. Now, to me, I didn't know what chemical weapons was, so I went to the United Nations website and researched what it was. And such weapons basically consisted of well-known commercial chemicals put into standard munitions. We can talk about some mustard gas, some sort of munition that is designed to attack somebody's central nervous system. Okay, there's been nearly 100,000 deaths resulted with chemical weapons. Since World War I, chemical weapons have caused more than 1 million casualties globally. So with that being said, the Albany Police Force does not use chemical weapons as they are defined by the United Nations. we utilize chemical agents, or also known by the CDC as riot control agents. Okay, for our police to have legitimacy in our community, we must have both social and law and order, because the public has to expect both in furtherance of this vision and mission of the Albany Police Department that I previously put up in this slide. The tools of de-escalation can be anywhere from an armored rescue vehicle, OC, CS, a taser, less lethal munitions, just the mere presence of a uniformed police officer, and verbal communication. So we use the word de-escalation a lot through this presentation. And again, I just wanted to touch on that and what it is. We want to de-escalate tense situations where protests devolve into civil unrest, violent riots. Your police deployed a public address stating, cease and desist the unlawful behavior, or you may be subject to arrest. So we had the nights of the riots, we attempted to de-escalate the crowds by having a recording playing over a PA system. And in some substance, the announcement that was made was, this is an unlawful assembly. Your refusal to disperse will subject you to arrest. And then we had also give commands that we were deploying chemical agents. Those who remained did so on their own volition. De-escalating CS and less lethal munitions were deployed at that time in concert to stop violence against members of the public and officers. The lawful order given, this is an unlawful assembly, should have been enough for the reasonable person to comply and leave that area. The people that were part of this riot were not there for a peaceful protest. The peaceful protest escalated into a group of individuals acting tumultuous and violent behavior. The CS persuaded a reasonable person to continue again in that violent tumultuous behavior. CS and less lethal munitions created a safe barrier between us and the rioters. It created time and distance, allowing for deployment of more resource and better tactics to be deployed. It provided our police force with a multiplier as the number of personnel necessary to require the areas of Arch Street, Pearl Street, Madison Avenue, Washington Avenue, Central Avenue, that which outpaced the numbers of available personnel, even with additional mutual aid. So what that means is that we utilize this smoke and the CS to assist us because we were outnumbered. And even with mutual aid, we were still outnumbered. And this CS acted as a force multiplier, and we got the desired result we wanted without using any more force than necessary. So there has been thousands of protests in Albany from 1960 to 2021. We've only had 2 open air deployments that we utilize CS and less lethal munitions. And this is over the course of 32 years of the emergency services team being trained on CS and less lethal munitions. So the total number of monitored protests from May 2020 to January 2021 were 58. The city of Albany ratio of violent riots to protests were 3.4% versus the national average of 7%. So just to put in perspective. The South End protest started as a peaceful protest, which became a march in front of South Station. With that, there was criminal mischief, larcenies, assaults, arsons. The intent of the rioters appeared to storm the South Station, which we have seen across the country. And we had a due diligence to protect that station and protect the citizens of Albany from any further violence. That night, approximately 200 people prior to emergency services team arriving to South Station, approximately 200 people were in front of the South Station, which later involved into Molotov cocktails being thrown at the officers, police officers, just with a riot helmet and a plastic shield and batons trying to defend the station and make arrests. They had bricks, bottles, again, Molotov cocktails, improvised explosive devices, commercial grade fireworks tossed at them. In that melee of the South Station, 2 officers were severely injured among other officers that had minor injuries, but 2 severe, one that's still out today with a concussion, and we don't know when he's going to return to work. So once the emergency services team was activated by the command staff, at that point of just the mere presence of an emergency services team there with a rescue vehicle and the deployment of chemical munitions and less lethal munitions saved that area of the city for that night. So throughout the night, the riots evolved. And I recall the night when, or the time when there was a car accident, I believe in the area of Green Street in Dongan. And there was a pregnant female that was involved in a car accident, personal injury auto accident. The fire department could not get to them. The South Lateral One could not get to them because of the violent protest. We utilized our emergency services team rescue vehicle to escort the fire department to this pregnant female who was just injured in a car accident. Escorted them to assist her. At that time, we had to leave officers on South Pearl Street, again, just with riot gear, riot helmet, and a plastic shield and a baton, no CS. And they were, at that time that we were gone, they were forced to retreat. During that retreat, because they had no other choice and they weren't going to use any other force, at that time, they had a retreat, the crowd gained control of a tractor trailer that was stuck in traffic because they were impeding vehicular traffic. Tractor trailer had no place to go. That time they hijacked that tractor trailer, ripped the driver out of that car, and we had to witness this. Officers had to witness this and were unable to assist him because of the size of the crowd. And then they began to light the tractor trailer on fire, causing a very violent very dangerous situation. So without the presence of it just goes to show, without the presence of the emergency services team and the use of chemical agents and less lethal munitions for that short period of time that we had to escort the fire department, the crowd was able to gain control of the patrol officers at that time. For the Arbor Hill, the headquarters, again, a day of peaceful protest evolved into a night of a riot. Chief Hawkins was with the crowd, trying to de-escalate the crowd and talk to them and reason with them. The protest evolved into the evening hours, at which point it became violent. Specifically, I remember that night that we all had improvised explosives set off in our area, towards our direction. I recall fireworks going off next to my head, which prompted us to utilize chemical agents to de-escalate that situation and to disperse that crowd. And it worked. It worked effectively. All right. So in conclusion, the future deployments consideration. So after every operation, we have a debrief, okay? And we concluded through that debrief that we learned some things. After every operation, we take the pros and cons. So with that, although the members of the Albany Police Department Emergency Service Team were regularly trained in the use of decontamination of chemical agents, we have learned that the following for future open air deployments. Use of a louder PA system would have assisted the officers in having announcements made to rioters that their actions were unlawful and they must disperse, be heard at a further distance. A portable PA system with a higher volume capabilities has been purchased and we're waiting their arrival. Also, what take away from this is in the future, the Albany Police Department Public Information Officer is going to be releasing decontamination instructions, as I previously talked about, to the public for any person that was exposed, and that's going to be released on social media. I want to thank you guys for your time. I hope this cleared up any questions that you guys had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, I really want to get the public in for their comment. Tom, Mr. Hoey, you've had your hand up since the very beginning. I know I said that council members would go and ask questions or talk about this stuff before the public, but Tom, are you still there? Would
I'm having
members?
trouble.
Okay. Yeah, you're lag. So would members have a problem waiting for the public to go, or?
I vote the public goes first.
Yes, I'd like to hear from them. Okay, so JR or Danielle, can you?
Do you want to do Lauren Manning first?
Yes, sure.
Hi. This though is actually from, this is from the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice, Dr. Alice Green. And her comments are, my first two-hand experiences of being tear gassed during a peaceful protest have contributed to my current thoughts and concerns about police use of tear gas and other chemical agents against community people. One of my experiences took place right here in Albany in the late spring of 2020. But both incidents revealed how the use of such heavily militarized tactics can be harmful and dangerous to people's health. It is documented that both tear gas and pepper spray can pose serious threats to those with a series of underlying heart or lung conditions, particularly asthma. Tear gas can also irritate the lining of the lungs. This means that the use of these chemicals is especially dangerous to African Americans who disproportionately suffer from such illnesses, especially asthma in both children and adults. It is important to note that police officers unleashed tear gas this past spring in the south end of Albany, which is heavily populated by African Americans and other people of color. It has also been recognized by some law enforcement experts across the country that the use of these chemicals can operate to quickly escalate conflicts and violence rather than promote calm and peace as may be intended. Recent reports that examined the use of military tactics used in the 9 major cities during protests over the police killing of George Floyd bear out these concerns about the use of such chemicals. As well, 2 of the Albany Collaborative Working Groups recommended that in reimagining public safety, the Albany Police Department should abandon warrior-like police tactics that include the use of tear gas and other chemical weapons against community residents. They urge discarding such militaristic approaches and instead adopt a guardian mindset to address crowd control problems. The Center for Law and Justice has already expressed support for the recommendation before the Common Council and now strongly urge passage of Local Law CF 2021, introduced by Common Council member Judy Dochette. The ordinance refers to the use of chemical weapons and kinetic energy munitions on civilian populations. Alice Green, Executive Director. Kelly, after other people talk though, I would like to give comment as a resident.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to call the next speaker, who's Elizabeth King.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you. And I just want to thank you all for giving me the chance to submit my comment, and also thank you all for your presentations and everything leading up to this. But I just wanted to submit a comment on behalf of myself and my family. We're Albany residents, and I just like to express my full support for Judy Dochette's proposed local law C of 2021 that bans the use of chemical weapons and agents, as well as the use of kinetic energy munitions. Just as a resident, I really strongly believe, and so does my whole family, that there's really no place under any circumstance, especially in an open air setting, where innocent bystanders and people that are really not even involved in the activity that is in question are affected. And I really, based on what would happen last summer and across the country, we know that there can be extremely negative impacts to the health, safety, and well-being of our community members, especially those that are marginalized, already have other health issues. And as noted, there's really no information or studies on the effects of chemical agents used in open air settings. And I think also the use of those chemical weapons and agents in open air settings are indiscriminate by nature. And really, again, I see no place for those in our community. And myself and our family really just urge the Common Council to consider and pass this legislation. And we also, following on the previous speaker's remarks, fully support demilitarizing our police force and hope that this will kind of spark additional efforts to continue to re-examine any unnecessary expenditures and police services in our community, and really think about how we can reinvest that money into our community and services that better serve our community. So again, I'd just like to express my full support for this proposed local law C, and thank you all again for the opportunity to submit my comments.
Mr. Chair, we also have public comment from Anita Thayer, if she's still with us.
Yep, I'm still here. I'm very patient. Good evening, folks. Good to see everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm speaking tonight in support of local law C. I ask that this committee vote the proposed local law out of committee and send it to the full council with a recommendation of support and without modification. This local law will restore the long-established policy of the Albany Police Department of not using tear gas or rubber bullets in response to demonstrations and unpermitted gatherings of residents. Voting for this ban will restore our well-established policy that the APD must be respectful of the right of our residents to speak out, protest, and express anger. We saw a breakdown of that respect from the APD on the evenings of May 30th and June 1st of last year. The posture of the APD on those days was not that of a community policing agency, but of an occupying army using military tanks on our street, wearing military gear, and standing outside the Morton Avenue Police Station in the middle of the South End community in military formation. It is clear from the recent proceedings and recommendations of the collaborative task force that a more militarized police force with more militarized tools is not the change Albany wants. I moved to Albany in 1967 to attend the State University. The first protests that I was aware of in the city of Albany were the assemblies, planned and unplanned, that followed the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King in April of 1998. Some of the community anger at that time was directed to the APD. I recall media reports of stones being thrown at police cars, but I do not recall a single use of tear gas. What has followed in my lifetime has been years of protests, but I don't recall a single use of tear gas until last year. And in my written statement, I expand on the history of protests that I've observed. I just want to say that it is not an accurate history to portray all these protests as picture perfect protests. These were, many of these protests were challenging. Many aspects of them were volatile. There were frequently people, one or two or a small group, that tried to escalate beyond what the main organizers had anticipated. And there were agent provocateurs that tried to shed bad light on the protests. So I think it's a false sense of history to say we only had peaceful protests in the past and we never needed to go any further. For whatever reasons, the police and department in the past could handle these protests, and whether they were lawful and peaceful or became a little adventuresome around the edges, could handle them without the use of military style weapons. And I consider tear gas a military style weapon. And part of protest is the right to express anger. So it's not just, lobbying for this or that, it's also the right to express anger. So I ask that the council vote to ban tear gas and rubber bullets. The police department hasn't needed it for 50 years. They can figure out how to handle the protests that this city's going to face in the future without this weapon for the future. Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the council members who support this law, and I look forward to getting this before the full council as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mr.
Next.
Chair, I think we have Bowen Suchak.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me jump on here to comment. First and foremost, I just want to say that for Albany Police Department to come up here and do a presentation that took up that much time is a form of gaslighting for the community. We have been talking about this tear gas, and we've been talking about the egregious use of violence and military tactics that the police department used on the night of the protest, both nights in the South End and in Arbor Hill. And the one thing I will say also is there is no way that you would have seen this exact action taking place in Uptown Albany or in Pine Hills in Albany. You would just not see that happen. And so I think, it's really insulting for them to turn this into a presentation and use science and try to reduce this to simply a conversation around the terminologies and the definitions. I was there the night of South End, and yes, there was definitely a lot of property being damaged and things that were happening that were illegal. There's no doubt about that. But I want to also point out the fact that literally after the street was cleared, because I live in the neighborhood, I stayed behind, I made sure people were safe, and I witnessed myself, and I filed a police complaint with the police review board on this. And I thankfully just finally got a letter, thankfully, because the CPRB is finally going to have some teeth and be able to deal with the police department and their actions. But I want to be clear, I witnessed myself with my own two eyes, multiple times the police department firing tear gas canisters into empty streets, open windows in a hot summer day, empty streets. Why? Because they did not care about that community. I watched them, I witnessed with my own eyes them fire tear gas in Arbor Hill on the Monday evening where the protest moved to Arbor Hill, when there was no announcement given on a PA, none. There was no announcements. There was no EMTs present. Both are illegal uses of your own protocols that you have. And the mayor herself and the chief, who I believe is still on this call, and the chief, you both admitted on a community call that a block at a time had, you can go back and look at the recording, weeks after that you made mistakes, that you deployed tear gas illegally, that you shouldn't have done it, you regret it, yet to this day, and maybe I'm mistaken, but it's been a pandemic, so I haven't been on vacation or gone anywhere. There's not been a public conversation about this. There's not been a public reckoning about this. There has not been a public apology for this from the mayor or the chief of police. I support this bill 100% as a community member. I also speak on behalf as the executive director of Youth FX, an organization that had many young people who came out in protest and several young people who were shot in the back with rubber bullets on that Saturday night and were gassed by the police department. So I just want to be clear. I think to turn this into a debate about whether or not the chemical deterrent in a particular thing that you use is safe or not safe is ridiculous. What we are talking about is the fact that the Albany Police Department was not trained and still remains untrained in the usage of these types of weapons. And like other cities across the country, they have been used and deployed illegally, and it needs to stop. We need to have a ban. This is a banned weapon that has been banned from the use in the military and in the case of war, and it needs to be banned on the streets of our communities when we have vulnerable populations, young people, children, and elderly folks who are affected, and there has been no care. There has been no apology made about what happened on those evenings. And I just want to be clear, just a week ago, reports were released and are starting to come out from cities across the country that the police departments in multiple cities across the country deployed tear gas illegally, beat protesters, put people in the hospital, blinded 8 people across the country from tear gas canisters and from rubber bullets. These weapons do not have any place in any civilian usage, and you know this. I support this bill, and I hope that when this goes to the council, that we get to see where our council members stand on this and whether or not the council members support their police departments being able to poison and gas their own communities. And I say, you say these excuses about, oh, well, there might be a riot and this and that. You need to learn alternate techniques. That is your job. You are supposed to be about public safety. not militaristically attacking your own communities. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I believe Ms. Manning would like to make additional comments as a community member and a citizen.
Okay, we'll go there and then we'll hit the council members.
Hi, thanks. Sorry. I feel like I'm being greedy. So it's weird because I woke up this morning and my Facebook memories were from exactly 8 years ago today when the police did the SWAT training in Adi Arbor and tear gassed my 4-year-old asthmatic daughter and myself. They were training and they threw tear gas into a vacant apartment 40 feet from my home with the windows open. It was a nice March hot day. And me and my daughter woke up coughing, sneezing, wheezing. It was very painful. But the fact is, I came to the Common Council then. Many of you were not members 8 years ago and discussed this exact thing. You know, this training, this militarization, this lack of concern for the community. And the other conversation is to even answer, Baldwin, the reckoning is this ban. And I support it because we're not here because of what is in the chemical agent. We're here because we can't trust you to use it properly and to value Black and brown lives when you use it. I said 8 years ago, this type of stuff would not have happened in Pine Hills to the Common Council, and we're still here. And I really appreciate the introduction of this bill. I really appreciate, you know, all of the new blood on this council. And to be clear, this is the reckoning. This is part of that reckoning, this bill. It needs to be banned. We cannot trust our own police force to use it responsibly. And it has to go. It is dangerous. It is painful. You do feel like you're suffocating. And I also agree with Bob when my brother was on Bradford Street on the night of the Henry Johnson protest. There were a couple, 3 or 4 guys that broke off and they tear gassed his whole block. He had his windows open, 3 children in the house. He couldn't go outside to get fresh air. The whole block was tear gassed. Nobody told him not to use water on his 4-year-old daughter. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't even be debating this. I support this fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. So what was the order, Ms. Gillespie?
I think it was Tom Hoey, Alfredo Ballerin, followed by Judy Dochette.
Okay.
Can I be delayed? I'm almost home and I'm driving, so I'll let everybody go first, please.
Okay. Mr.
And then
Ballard.
Derek Johnson.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
So I've got to say I'm a little disappointed with the presentation. I'm not sure if the APT is aware, but 4 of the 5 members of this committee didn't need a lesson of the side effects, the psychological effects, the burning of your skin and eyes, or the burning when you shower. I kind of wish they would have told us that before we got hit with it. More than half of the council tasted that burning and they felt it. So I think, I'm not sure if the APT was aware of that, but I think you should have started with a different technique than the consequences of the gases, because we felt it. And you know, I was there both nights, so I can tell you, it was scary. It was very, very scary, specifically the May 30th. I truly believe our department was not ready. And that's not taking away anything from anyone that was there, but I don't believe they were ready. And I don't believe that they did the best for themselves and for our residents. On June 1st, I believe that could have been prevented. I honestly believe that if APD had some individuals, some officers in the crowd, they could have seen that it was a different crowd. It was a crowd that was that you had members that were doing a much better job overseeing themselves and trying to pinpoint and handle the individuals that were trying to escalate. You know, that Monday, that group was a much better group of individuals. It was different. It was a different group. It was a different crowd, but they got hit even just as hard. And the individual that threw the fireworks, they got on their dirt bike, threw the fireworks, and went up the street. They didn't feel it. They didn't get hit. But if APT had someone on the ground, they could have, on the other side of the fence, they could have said, hold off. Put the smoke. Don't put the gas. So I was hoping to hear what APD has learned and what APD is going to have to prevent these, because we're the capital and we're going to have more difficult days ahead of us. And we've seen in our own, in our country's capital, what happens when we're not ready. So I'm hoping for a better answer than what I've got so far, because right now I can tell you, I wasn't really satisfied with the presentation, and I was really hoping that I was going to get some information about what APD had learned, what they were going to do in the future, and how this would be something that wouldn't happen in our city again. Because I'll tell you this, it's one thing for me to have had to feel that burn. I went down there. I'll take the hit. I took the risk. I knew what the potential risk of being down there. But it's another thing for my neighbors, for my seniors, for my son, to have had to breathe that in. So I look forward to the conversations, and something has to change.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Ms. Doche?
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. I'm more upset than I was before. First of all, I want to say we have a policy on the Common Council. When you're going to make a PowerPoint presentation, you provide the PowerPoint presentation to the entire council in advance. So here we are. Didn't know we were going to have a half-hour, 45-minute PowerPoint presentation. I don't have a copy of it. Police department doesn't respect our policies.
That's just real quick pause, Judy. That would be on me. I found out about it yesterday, which was after time where we could have gotten a copy. It was kind of late, and we should have. But I didn't mention that to the chief in my conversation with him, so it's my fault. But we should have had it.
I am a little concerned that maybe you are being a little over accommodating to the police department, given what your position is on this piece of legislation. I have heard people talk about this wouldn't happen in their neighborhood, and I don't think it would happen in my neighborhood. But I will say it would be unacceptable if it happened in my neighborhood. And my policy is, if the schools in the city of Albany are not good enough for my kids, then I'm in there fighting to make them good enough for my kids, because then they're not good enough for anybody's kids. If a policy or procedure is not good enough for my neighborhood, then it's not good enough for anybody's neighborhood. And everybody on the council ought to be thinking about, what if this happened in your neighborhood? People would be up in arms. I'm upset because I have heard what some people have heard, that the police department has said procedures were not followed that night. This is the first time I got a complete justification from the police department for what happened on that night. I'm upset because people like to use the terminology riots, because that gives them cover. We haven't defined what a riot is. We haven't defined what is acceptable protests, what isn't acceptable protests. For people to be angry about what has been happening in this country is legitimate. I said once that I have been aware of discrimination since I was about 10 years old. Man, I certainly thought as I was growing up and people were talking about race, that we would be in a lot better place than we are now. But this was justified. Oh, it's the first time in 32 years that it has happened. Oh, and it just happens to be in a neighborhood where it's predominantly people of color live. I heard it said tonight that the police would have been justified in using lethal force. And I just have a little bit of a different take on things. As somebody trained in the law, as a lawyer, generally you're taught that you're not supposed to be protecting property. If somebody comes to your house, if they're threatening you personally, it's one thing. For you to be protecting property, lethal force is not justified. I understand that some police officers felt threatened that night. We can also go into the details, and maybe we ought to have a complete investigation of what happened that night, because my understanding is that the police officers were mostly inside the building, and then came out in riot gear to address the protesters. I am shocked that we've been talking about de-escalation, and I have seen de-escalation going on in this city a lot, and I've been very pleased with how the leadership sometimes of the police department has de-escalated very tense situations without using tear gas. The idea that somebody would present the Common Council with something and say, tear gas is a de-escalation technique, blows my mind. A lot of the other things that were put up on that slide that I don't have, I can't refer to, so I can't bring them up specifically in my comments, that were classified as de-escalation is as far as I can imagine in many cases from what I think about when I think about de-escalation. Going back to the comment about riots, what I hear is the police chief and when he's not in town, other people on the police force get to decide when something's a riot and tear gas gets to be used. A few days after the events, there was a chanting, protest, march, walking through my neighborhood without a permit or whatever. People were out cheering people and they were escorted by the police. That's an example of de-escalation. Our solution, what we learned from that night, is we need a louder speaker system. And we're going to put on social media afterwards how people decontaminate. I can't imagine being tear gassed and saying, oh, I need to go on social media and figure out how to decontaminate. When my eyes are tearing, I'm coughing, I'm disoriented. And the speaker system. How many languages was any notice given? How many languages are acceptable for notice to be given to people who have assembled in the area? But here's what I want to know from the police chief. Two questions I have for the police chief. Did the mayor know that you were doing this presentation opposing this legislation? And which would tell me that the mayor really doesn't adopt the plan that the collaborative has no intention of implementing the collaborative. Basically, the chief gets to pick and choose what in that report, what in that plan that we've all adopted now. I'm there too because I'm part of a group, even though I didn't vote for it, because I didn't think it was a plan. And either we have a plan or we don't have a plan. If we have a plan, this legislation implements a significant part of that plan, including a first step towards the demilitarization of our police and saying to people, things have got to change. But I would like to know from the chief if the mayor knew about his presentation, that he's opposing the implementation, the adoption of this legislation, and the entire justification that went on for what happened for May 30th and June 1st. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, Chief, do you care to, before we move on, address her questions?
Yes, the mayor is aware that this presentation is occurring tonight. She's aware of what my position is. I am not aware of what the mayor's position is on this issue.
Thank you, Chief. Were there two questions, Judy, or just one? I forget.
I think that answers it. However, I find it I think we have the answer to the question regarding the mayor's position because she's aware of this and she did not prevent the chief of police from appearing and taking that position. And there's nobody else from the administration taking the position.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Mr. Johnson. Are you there, Mr. Johnson? Okay, guys. Looks
You
like
want to
Mr.
move on to Hoey and I'll
Yeah.
reach out to Johnson?
Yeah, I don't. Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for letting me come in late. I heard Councilman Ballerin mention that he's a parent. I'm a parent too. And I'll do anything for my kid. I'm a city common council member. And I believe in our police. And I would do anything I could to support my police within reason. And I've been on this council going on 4 years soon, 3.5, whatever. And I brought up that we have a serious shortage of police in the city, and it keeps getting worse and worse and more people leaving. I talked to the mayor and I said, can't we just give like a across the board increase to help the officers because they don't have a union right now, or there's some kind of union problems. And I am a union officer, and I know you can do that. An employer can give a raise right across the board to everybody to help them survive. So we have a police force that's undermanned, underpaid, and I should say understaffed, underpaid, and resorting to using cheaper methods of trying to keep a population under control. I live in the United States of America. Constitution says we the people decide. Okay, and I have a real problem here tonight. Okay, we had a common council meeting on June 1st. And during the meeting, Council Member Robinson and Council Member Love were called out because there was a situation brewing down on Henry Johnson Boulevard at police headquarters. Our meeting ended, and I had talked to a few council members. I said, maybe we should go down and see if we can help de-escalate. I traveled down from uptown, that people make comments about, but we have our troubles and struggles here. I went down on a Monday night, left my family to see what I could do. I got down there. There was barricades put up around the police headquarters, and there was about 200 or 300 people milling about, complaining. People see me, a white guy down there, and I think I had my suit on, my tie, and they want to know why I was there and who was I? Was I a policeman? I said, no, I'm a common council person. I want to see what's going on and what can be done to try to help people. This was a bad situation going on in the whole country. And we know there was riots all over because of the injustice, just one of many, many over many years of discrimination, systematic discrimination going on. One person asked me, well, if you're with us, kneel down. I kneeled. I had no problem with that because I believe that every human being has a right to survive and to exist. As long as they don't damage other people or hurt other people. Don't, if you hit me with your fist, that's one thing. I jumped over the barricade, talked to the police, talked to the chief. While I was talking to the chief, we started getting hit with fireworks. And the situation just went south. It went south very fast. All of a sudden there was gas flying. And I'm sorry to say, there was no announcement made. I don't know how you could say there was an announcement made. There wasn't an announcement made. My fellow council members, Council Member Kimbrough, Council President Ellis, helped me over the fence, back out up the road in the middle of this gas, and I was gas bad. And I went down to the ground. They dragged me down to Henry Johnson Boulevard. It was the worst experience of my life, and I'll never forget it. You say there's no problems with these chemicals? If you Google it, Google gastrointestinal problems caused by tear gas. A few weeks later, I had a bad infection, went septic, and I almost died. I was in St. Peter's for 4 days. Now, was it caused by the gas? I don't know, but if you Google it and you see that there's problems with gastrointestinal problems caused by this, I got to think. But I chose to go down there because this is my duty as a council member to find out what's going on in our city. Now, you bring up, well, this is how we do it now. What happened, and this came up with other council members brought up. 100 years ago, we had a terrible trolley strike where there was all sorts of riots and stuff. It's in the paper, Times Union, every day. They go back 100 years. I've been following about this strike. What did they do back then? There was no tear gas. And contrary to what you said, if you Google it, you Google the CDC, I'm sorry, the gas, the CN or CS gas, the CS. 1993, it was banned in warfare. So we can't use this on a battlefield where we're out to kill people, but it's okay to use in our cities? Come on. You know, what I would have liked to heard tonight is we're going to come up with ways to try to do better crowd control. You know, I'm glad to hear that you're going to get a louder loudspeaker, but there was no loudspeaker there. There was no warning. So here I am on Henry Johnson Boulevard trying to get my breath back. And I was there with Council Member Ballerin standing by my side because he knew I was in bad shape. And then all of a sudden, the troops started marching down the street. And I said to one of them, I'm on the Common Council. I'm just here observing. I'm trying to recover. He said, you got to move along. I started to move, and then another officer with a shield pushed me into a tree. Pushed me. And I looked at the hate in his face. I didn't feel good that night. I didn't feel good about being a citizen of Albany that night, about being a member of the Common Council that night. It was wrong. Using guns, using rubber bullets. I mean, this is what happened where my family comes from in Ireland. This is what they do. You shoot people, you know, if you get hit in the eye with a rubber bullet, what happens? Oh yeah, there's no impact. It doesn't break skin, but you might lose your eye. And by the way, I have a cousin who lost his eye in Ireland. So it does happen. CDC, let's talk about that. I was looking at it while this was going on. CDC recommends once you're exposed, taking off your clothes and washing them. They got to come off. I saw these apartment windows open right next to the police headquarters. People were living there. What are you going to do? Wash their bedding? You're going to wash everything in the house? You're going to throw away their food? They don't have air conditioning. It was a hot summer night. It was June. They had to have the window open. There's kids in there. So, you know, I can continue to go on. It's just, I'm just really, you know, in favor of this. I think we need to do it. I think we need to come up with other ways. I think we need to build our police force. I think we need to have more social interactions, maybe hired social workers that we can go out, try to calm the situation. People were angry. Oh, and I got one more thing to add. The fireworks. I witnessed the fireworks being thrown. I seen them. I saw that mattress going underneath the police car. And they could have pulled out. I mean, that could have been prevented, but I'm not even going to go there. But people throwing the fireworks were white guys. Short-cut hair. To me, they looked like neo-Nazis. Were they? I don't know. It's funny, though, that across the whole country and during this period of time with the unrest in the country, and we see what went on with at the Capitol, you know, why weren't there undercover out there tracking, trying to find out who these people were? I saw the neighborhood people talking. You're not from our neighborhood. What are you doing here? I mean, they asked me what I was doing. I explained who I was. These guys didn't. They just left. They caused a problem. They hid behind a crowd and threw bombs. So we need to do something better. And we need to do it soon. So I'm going to be in full support of moving this out in a favorable recommendation. Thank you for listening to me. But this is an emotional moment. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Frederick.
Is Mr. Johnson back?
He is back.
I can go
Okay,
after
sorry
him.
about that. There you go, Mr.
Yes, I am back. And boy, Tom, you took me back. I'll never forget May 29th. May 29th, you know, my mother has 48 hours to live. I've received a call from the mayor asking me to go down the street and to try to make a difference in a situation that was getting out of control. I go upstairs, I get dressed, I walk down the street. When I get there, it's a tense moment. I position myself in between the police and I position myself in between the protesters. And I made up an appeal for people to go home. I talked about the ideal of earlier being one of the best protests I ever saw. You know, some people responded and they moved away, but in the middle of, you know, me talking, all of a sudden, my mouth just started getting numb. And because behind me, someone started spraying something. And so later on, I will find out that the police were spraying it. And so like to hear that it was an announcement, it was never an announcement made on the 29th. And, you know, on the 1st, I'll never forget that day because that was the day that my mother passed away. And you know, and going through what I was going through, I happened to just look at Facebook and see the situation uptown. And I made a gut decision just to go up there. And I believe at the time that I was standing next to the chief. We were talking when the fireworks were thrown. So you know what? People were out of control. But you know, the vision that when I think about tear gas, I just think about our kids coming home from school and getting tear gas, getting pepper sprayed. And I just think that contributes to the animosity and the disrespect that exists between the police and our younger community. Is how we are handled, you know, the first option, you know, like when I think about this, I wish they would have pepper sprayed Dante Ivy, you know, our family would feel differently, you know, in that regards. But I think personally, there's no way that I could support pepper spray being used on human beings. I think that when you ask, well, what did they do different 100 years ago? I'll tell you one simple answer. 100 years ago, most of the APD was from the city of Albany. And so when you have officers that come from the direct communities, they have built-in relationships. So in a time like that, those relationships are most valuable to the city, to the police department, and more importantly, to the people. And so when you say for them to go to their neighborhood, that happened in my neighborhood on my street. And, you know, it's not, we couldn't forget about it for days later because they had the barricades up. So when you hear people's frustration about that night, we got to remember how we got to that night. That wasn't people out just, you know, meeting up to horseplay, to be vandals. It was people that, you know, have seen this happen time and time again and have been crawling out for change and only being ignored. So that night, a lot of things could have been handled differently. And for, you know, to have to sit here and listen to a report that says, you know, patting ourselves on the back like we did, because, you know, when APD does something wrong, we all do something wrong because we represent the city. So, you know, if we are going to move forward, and as I said, when we have these difficult conversations, people have to understand that it's pain, it's hurt, it's a lot of trauma that we have experienced in our neighborhood. And when it's coming from the hand that's supposed to protect you, that's a hard pill to swallow. So I will not be, I will be supporting this bill. Let me not make, you know, let me not twist my words up, but our people deserve better at all times. Thank you.
I believe
Ms.
Councilwoman
Frederick?
Frederick is next.
Thank you. So as I was listening to the presentation, I was thinking, when we talk about public safety, I think one of the first statements that was made was, if we were to ban tear gas, public safety would decline here in the city of Albany. When I think of public safety, I think about the relationship between our cops and our community, and making sure that that relationship is strong and good so that we can all work together, and the police would be there for when police are needed, and they're there to serve the community and be there with everyone in the various neighborhoods. Right now, there's about 300 comments on the Facebook page. Been trying to keep up. It's a lot. 300 comments of the community that you serve, outraged by the presentation, the lessons learned that were articulated, and really no sense of apology for what happened or acknowledgement of the fact that things were done that really hurt our community. And when we look back to those events that occurred over the summer, the concept of people, or the comment of people throwing bricks, if we look at the person that was arrested for doing such act, he was not from the community, which was primarily Black and brown. He was a white man who seemed to infiltrate the protest that was happening, rightfully so, to cause chaos, as we saw across the nation. And so I question why tear gas had to be used in that scenario when we had like-minded infiltrators come in specifically to go against the mission of that night and cause chaos. Why not narrow in on those individuals as opposed to affect the whole community? Again, primarily Black and brown community, having to deal with health issues, trauma. There's definitely trauma that stems from that. I think some comments were made that the impacts were minimal. We saw a recollection tonight from a council member who was brought to tears from the trauma that occurred from being tear gassed. And so it's painful to me to hear that. I will be supporting this. I think there are other measures that can be used. And I think that we need to make sure that we are serving the community, because that is our primary job. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frederick. And so for my part in this, I'm a retired police officer. Thank you, Judy, for throwing it out there that I have this bias or something that's guiding me. Having worn that uniform and been in those situations, I understand a little better than most folks. However, I was at both locations, caught off guard, didn't think it appropriate for use. Right now, as we sit here, the presentation that was just put on made me feel pretty much the same way most other folks did. Again, we didn't get a copy of it. I didn't ask for it, so that's why we didn't get it. But I expected something different. You know, coming into this, you know, I still, my concern is we take this away, and then, you know, you close the distance between the police and folks. And again, this issue is only going to come up in these types of situations, which are few and far between. It's not like the everyday. So coming into this, my support was for really restricting or trying to restrict the use of this, you know, to very, very specific and unique situations. But I mean, this conversation is bothering me. And as usual with these matters, the police and community, I mean, I'm an African-American man. I could tell you more stories about being mistreated by the police than most of the folks that are activists that get dealt with every day, you know? And if I got hung up on that, you know, I'd either be too sad or too angry to function in this world because it's been that bad. But I don't know where we go from here. Most members are obviously in support of this. After everything that's transpired in the conversation we've had, I'm not too sure I'm not either. But again, I not favoring my friends or family on the Albany Police Department, but police officers in general. I understand the job, and I think it's needed. I think we might see some issues down the line if it's taken away and we don't have an alternative. Where do we end up in these situations where there's a confrontation between the community and the police department? That's the question. Question to the chief and the command staff. Have you looked around the country at alternatives to? I'll get you in a minute, President Ellis.
No problem. That was going to be my question. Go ahead.
So anyone in the command staff care to have we? And actually, before answering that question, can someone just kind of shorten to the point? And I'm talking to the command staff from the police department. Shorten to the point, kind of give me the gist of the policy for use of tear gas. Can you all hear me?
It looks like they're flipping through the pages. They were muted initially, so I expect a response relatively soon.
I see the chief waving his hand, so.
I think they are talking, but I'm just getting like very muffled sound.
All right, I'm gonna try and call the chief and get him on the line.
Okay. And again, my thoughts on this, and just sitting here listening and understanding, and there's got to be something we can do. What happened that both of those evenings, and the one night down on Pearl Street, I was behind the Housing Authority building and got clobbered. And of course, I had the ability to jump in my car and drive down to Dongan Street.
I'm sorry, Chair. I have the chief on the line and they're ready to provide a response when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead. We can.
They're ready for you, Chief.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so, Mr. Kimbrough, just the first.
Are you still there, Chief?
Okay, yeah, we were getting feedback on our end. We're trying to. Just to answer your first question, the general policy with the deployment of chemical munitions is it's something that is the authority to do so is granted by the chief of police or the designee. So this authority can be delegated under circumstances. And so typically when we have situations where we have an active event that's occurring, then I would delegate that authority to those who are at the scene and who can better make a determination as to whether or not the deployment is responsible and appropriate. And you had another question.
About looking around the country for alternatives, but hold on that. So based on the policy, and of course, someone on the ground, someone here had to make the call and it was made. So would you agree or disagree that night, both of those evenings deployment were in line with the policy?
I think the deployments were in line with policy. And just to clarify some statements that were attributed to me, I was very clear early on that things could have been done differently. And I think with as we had our after action reports and we were looking at what happened, just like any other major incident, we find that there are ways of doing things differently. sometimes there are ways of doing things better. And so in the aftermath, we certainly looked at this and determined that there were some things that could have been done differently, potentially even better. But I never said that that anything was a violation of policy. Under the circumstances, never did I think that it was inappropriate. And I think, first of all, Mr. Kimbrough, as we take a step back from this, I think it's important to understand, for the community to understand, that this is not something that the police department has a policy that we have in order to antagonize or to make things worse in our community. These are tactics, just tools for when some of the more extreme events that we have that occur, that we saw not just in Albany, but in other places across the country, to maintain and de-escalate and to bring some calm to communities. And even, Ms. Frederick and some others on the call here, they said it was chaos. So I think we've got to be careful with these by taking away a tool in situations like this without an acceptable alternative for dealing with these sorts of situations. Because while we may not have seen riots, and yes, these were riots to the scale that we saw those 2 nights in the history of Albany, there's still a possibility that something like that could happen again. So when it does, we have to ask, what responsibility and expectations will this community have for its police department in maintaining calm? And, we talked about the attacks on the police officers, but this very well could have been an attack on City Hall. This could have been an attack on our education buildings. This could have been an attack on any other governmental facility or targeting a public figure in this city. And if you have a mob of people who are determined to cause chaos, like was described by some people on the call, determined to harm people, and the police are called to intervene, to bring some calm to this chaos, then by taking away some of these tools, it brings some severe limitations on how we handle this. And I think Detective Committe described this very well. What these alternatives are. We can simply stand back and let this chaos continue, and let these assaults on either people or institutions continue. We can send officers in hand-to-hand combat to address this and think about the optics in the result of something like that. Or we can use some of these intermediate types of tools that we have to address these sorts of situations. Is there any way to cut that feedback? I don't know where I'm hearing this from, but
Yeah. And so on the alternative question, what else is there out there? Is there an alternative to tear gas?
Here's the other, Mr. Kimbrough, in a situation like that. Any type of out of control mob of people, and let's look at what's happening. Let's look at the trends that we're seeing, not just in Albany, but across the country. We're seeing individuals, just like Ms. Frederick said, who are infiltrating peaceful protests. And they are using that cover to cause this chaos. And again, there are a couple of different options. We can simply stand back and let it happen and pick up the pieces afterward and say, okay, well, we'll rebuild. If somebody gets hurt, we'll take them away and we'll get them help. We can send officers in with a mob of people who are involved in a riot at City Hall or at our education buildings or at our federal courthouses or wherever it may be, at our police stations. We can send officers in to disperse these people who are not listening to commands to disperse and to cease the violent behaviors. We can send these officers in there to disperse these people. Think of the optics and think of the result. You're going to have officers in hand-to-hand combat with individuals who are there for that purpose. Or we can stand back again and just let this all happen. And the other alternative is to use these intermediate tools that we have. And just going back, there was a comment made earlier about protecting property. Let's be clear about what was happening. We saw across the country where police departments and other government facilities were overtaken by these mobs of people. Do we really want to allow a situation where, because we don't have any other tools besides deadly force or hand-to-hand combat with these mobs of people either at City Hall or at our education buildings or at our police departments, do we really want to just say that, well, we'll just let them overtake it and then we'll figure out it in the aftermath? So my perspective on this is, yes, there are things that could be done different. There are things that could have been done better, I would even say. But from my perspective, my opinion, let's take a look at what we have and let's make that better. Let's take a look at this tool. Where there are some concerns, and I agree 100% with what's been said to folks in this community about the use in residential areas. Let's look at that and let's work to see how we can make it so that we minimize or eliminate the possibility of that happening in the future. But let's not make a rash decision to take away a tool when there's no acceptable alternative right now. And without that, we're looking at potentially more chaos at our city halls, police departments, government institutions. We got to be careful with that, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And so I just like to ask, I started talking about my thoughts on this and where I am on this. I'm still, in my opinion and thoughts on this are based on my experience. It's not favoritism or where I came from, because I'm on both sides of this. So I will be a part of a positive recommendation to move this out of the committee, although I'm not sure ultimately how I'm going to fall on this. I'll just put that out there for folks that are wondering. So with that, I'm going to, I'm just trying to follow who I had before. I really want to get Sergeant Alex Hansen in there because he was, well, actually, no, it's President Ellis first, and then we'll let the sergeant talk.
Well, yeah, I guess, for people, tonight's presentation, we were looking for those alternatives. Also, we were looking for a policy. You asked, and the chief hasn't said what the policy is. When do you instruct to use tear gas? What is that scenario? Not just they're being violent, because that crowd that I was in when I was tear gassed, it wasn't violent until the perpetrators, which I found out in the crowd, being in a crowd, what milk was used for, because I didn't understand. And then my cousin pointed out to me, those two kids over there have milk. I said, what is that used for? And he says, for when you get tear gas. I said, why would they tear gas us? So it was evident. And so when people talk about how do you control a crowd, I think that's what we want to hear. How do you control a crowd? How do you move a crowd on without the need to tear gas? We haven't heard that. Only thing we hear is if they're violent. That crowd was not violent. Yeah, a firecracker was thrown. When that firecracker was thrown, that initiated the tear gas. There was no violence before that. So I guess for us, when we talk about policy, we want to know, what is the policy? If firecracker was thrown, that means they can tear gas people. That's not being violent. There was no destruction of property. So I'm pretty sure for many of the residents and Mr. Touche and everyone else who's been asking that question, we haven't got an answer. You just said we know you gave the order, that we got that. But what is the policy? Is it somebody throws a firecracker, you tear gas a crowd that's just standing there? So I think that's what we really wanted to hear. And then when you say there's no alternative, we would hope that in 2021 that our police department could come up with alternatives to tear gas. We would hope that leadership in that department would figure out how do we control a crowd that is not being violent, right? But that is not moving whatever fast enough or dispersing fast enough. Those are the things we'd like to hear about. So that way, when a crowd like that is not dispersing or whatever, we understand what tactics the department will use to do that. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about people attacking a building. That crowd was not violent. It was not disruptive. Somebody threw a firecracker and we all got tear gassed. So we would like to know a policy of, other than violence, how do you disperse a crowd that's standing there, not creating violence, but may not be moving on?
I think the chief is trying to respond. I'm gonna get him on the line again. Bear with me 1 second. I don't know if you want to move on to Officer Hanson while I call him.
Yeah,
Sergeant, forgive me.
yeah, Sarge, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to wait on the chief. I got so much to say right now. I'll start with this. I certainly understand everybody's feelings and your frustrations, your concerns, and I'm not saying they are not valid. But I will tell you this from a personal standpoint. I grew up, I did not like the police growing up. My father was killed by police when I was 6 years old, and it shaped the way that I saw police from that day forward. Any slight, even ever so slight negative interaction, me, my family, my friends had with the police from that point on, just further deteriorated or diminished the idea that, that there was ever going to be any type of positive connection there. In short, I went to college. I was forced to volunteer with the local police department there. Linked up with 2 detectives who did a lot of stuff in the community, totally changed my way of thinking. And here I land in Albany, wanting to be them, Donnie and Rick. And that's what I wanted to come back here and give back to my community. So last year, May 30th was the eve of my 20th anniversary. All right. Eligible for retirement. I put my time in. I was supposed to celebrate on Saturday. I could not take the day off because this protest was going on. So we came in for the protest. Glad I did. The protest was amazing. It was a beautiful showing. I'm somebody that does believe change is necessary. I've believed it, for my 20 years here. I mean, that, I landed here for a reason. But I promise you, that protest was something, and I believe it was Judy who said something about defining riot. That was a riot. All right. So the protest ended. I went home. I proceeded to start my, 20-year, or I thought I was, celebration, just to sit down at my table at home and have my phone just start blowing up about what was going down at South Station. So me and my whole unit, we all left home and left our families and came back to work. So we proceeded down to South Station. I went down to South Station in my car, my patrol vehicle, and had a brick thrown through my window. All right. You know, you guys are talking about gas, and I get it. I absolutely get it. But when we say that our lives were in danger, they truly were. I could have been killed. My wife was picking glass out of my face and arm the very next day. So I don't have a more perfect answer. You know, what do we do? What's the alternative? But I can tell you it was necessary. Something was necessary. Drastic measures were necessary that night to protect. We weren't protecting property, to protect life. To protect life. So, you know, again, there are innocent bystanders, you know, who are in their own homes, who have their windows open, and who were affected by this. And the whole thing was tragic. I mean, traumatic. So I do understand, and I'm not trying to, you know, diminish anything anybody has experienced. But I walk in unique shoes. All right. And you know, I'd be pressed to find somebody who has walked in my shoes. And there are a lot of men and women in this department who are from this city and who have similar backgrounds to my own. And honestly, I think those are the people who are more likely to weigh in on things like this because they've walked on both sides and have a greater understanding of what things are like on both sides, right? So I've been through those experiences as a resident of the city. And now I walk on the other side. You know, I talk about my father's death. My father's death has been a question mark my entire life, right? And I have to accept that it's something that I'm never going to have answers to. But after putting on this uniform, I have greater understanding of how some things may have occurred the night he was killed. So we have to get to a place of better understanding. Like you can never understand what it's like to put on this uniform and go out and do this job. I love this job. I've loved it for 20 years. I am committed to this job. But if you've never walked in these shoes, you don't understand what it's like, right? You know, in the same way somebody else, I think it was you, Derek, said something about, you know, a difference was that the officers back in the day were from the city. They were from the community. There is a lot to be said about that, right? So now, yes, you do have some officers here who don't have the same understanding that maybe some of the officers of old did. Maybe some of us who are from here do. But, you know, I don't think taking away, you know, chemical agents that I truly believe. I'm going home and I'm going to celebrate 20 years with my family. And now I'm here wondering if I'm going to make it back home to my family. I got 20 years here and I have seen everything under the sun, and I have been through a lot. I have never seen or been through anything like May 30th, ever. And I think to take away, you know, chemical agents or tools that we use to protect life, not every day, in drastic situations. That was a drastic situation. It was something I had never seen. It was something out of a movie. So I think it's necessary. I mean, I don't want to take up all night because this has been long. And I appreciate you all and I respect what you're doing. I respect your opinions, but please try to have some understanding of where we're coming from as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe the chief has resolved his technical issues and is able to respond to one of the questions on the floor.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chief.
Okay, I think Tanya conveyed my sentiments from what I heard, so I'm good. I don't have anything else to add to that.
Okay, so
Mr. Ballerin, Mr. Hoey, and Mr. O'Shea have their hands up.
yep. I don't know who was first, but
On my end, it says Mr. Ballerin.
okay, Mr. Ballerin.
Here's how I liked. Can you guys hear me? here's how I like to move forward. I like to get a real plan from APD on how they're going to keep our neighbors, our residents, and our officers safe if this ever happens again. And we didn't get that today. We didn't get that at all. And I was expecting that. I really was, because as you can hear, and thank you for sharing your story, this was traumatic on both ends. This left pain and scars on both sides of the fence. And I think we need to address that. We need to correct that. So I would like for us to move forward with having further discussion on this, on one, getting APD to give us a plan of how they're going to react to something like this without this tool, and how they would be able to keep our residents and their officers safe. I'd also like to have a discussion about the fact that it's used for gunmen who barricade themselves. We had a situation like that in my neighborhood a few months ago, where a gunman barricaded himself in one of the homes, and at a point they thought that he might have had hostages. Luckily he didn't, but it was a very scary couple of hours for the neighbors. They were terrified that there might be a shootout between officers and the gunman. So I think we have to have a conversation about that as well, because the goal of this is to keep our residents, our officers, and our neighbors safe. That's the goal of this. And I want us to make sure we do it correctly. So that's, I know there's a lot of thoughts on how do we move forward. Those are my 2 cents on how we should move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ballerin.
Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, I'm troubled. I'm troubled by, we see a lawbreaker on a dirt bike or an ATV, and we won't chase them because we're afraid of causing damage to innocent bystanders. But yet we can use these so-called tools, which can cause damage to bystanders also. You know, on the presentation, they said they've only used it twice. So what are we taking away? And it was twice outside, of course. But what are we taking away? You know, what happened during the Occupy Wall Street protest up right across the street from City Hall, where the protesters were there? You know, I don't remember them using tear gas there. They did break up the protest. They came in with horses and, you know, tore down the tents and stuff. But there was a lot of people there. There was a lot of angry people there. And, you know, it turned out the district attorney wouldn't even prosecute the people. I mean, that's what happened. You know, it was 10 years ago. It's kind of sketchy in my mind, but, you know, I bring this up. You know, what's an alternative? I'll tell you what an alternative is. There should have been undercover detectives out in the crowd seeing who was causing the problems. That's how we prevent it. When something like that, where you have a big group, have 2 or 3 detectives in there. What do they do at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. with the riots down there? They went to social media. They found out who did it after the fact. They let it de-escalate. After the fact, they went around and they arrested people. How many people were arrested after June 1st? I don't know. I know May 30th, and, you know, there was definite damage. People's lives were in danger. But putting gas out, you know, it's just, I'm still 100% that we need to get this tool taken away. And just because it's taken away doesn't mean that if there's ever a need in the future, we can't turn around and bring it back. That's what legislation bodies are for, trying it out. You know, we gave a chance. There was 2 opportunities, and it's caused a lot of problems. So, you know, again, that's my 2 cents.
Mr. O'Shea, right? It's Mr. O'Shea.
Thank you. So I want to go back to when I was watching the presentation. and they were talking about the effects, the pricking of skin, the eyes irritated, burning sensation, tearing of eyes, mucus dripping, blinking of eyes, coughing and sneezing, can't breathe, feeling of suffocation, and sometimes vomiting and nausea. And I was thinking that apparently some people think that that is what those people deserve. And that's what people are protesting. I don't think our job is to figure out exactly what should be done next, but to say this is not acceptable. We live in a country and we have a history where we say this is not acceptable. Slavery is not acceptable. Women not having the right to vote is not acceptable. Men being compensated for their athletics more than women and getting scholarships is not acceptable. We can go on and on about the changes that you see. And sometimes you just say, you got to take the leap forward and say, this is not acceptable. As I was listening to the chief and him basically saying the only alternative, really, I mean, he didn't say it quite that, but hand-to-hand combat. That's what would happen. Do you want that? And I have to say, I'm so offended that that is the solution. Again, there's a lack of understanding about the militarization of the police, lack of understanding about what de-escalation means. I can't imagine Chief Krakoff or Chief Cox saying to us, hand-to-hand combat would be the result, as opposed to actually working the problem. So we can sit here and we can defer about, oh, we can say, oh, we're going to sit down and we're going to examine this, but we need to send a clear message. This is not acceptable. And then they will figure out what they need to do in order to address this kind of situation. Most people, you know, haven't gone to the governor's website and looked at the guidance documents for his thing, but one of the key points in this 90-page document on page 20 is how should the police engage in crowd control? How should the police be demilitarized? That's in the document that was supposed to be part of the plan. Oh, guess what? We have the answer. Our document says no tear gas. That is the plan we adopted. We addressed this. And now we're being told that this is a rash decision. The police chief was a co-chair of this collaborative, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. These discussions have been going on for 6-9 months at this point. The proposal came out of, the proposal was part of the plan that he participated in and that was delivered to us on February 8th. This is now a rash decision. You know what some people say? Using tear gas on May 30th and June 1st was a rash decision. This is not a rash decision. This is months of discussions with the collaborative. And if the police chief and his staff disagreed with it, then they should have made sure it was not part of the proposal that the mayor put forth as a plan to this body. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. And what our lack of approval of this legislation will telegraph to everybody is the plan is not a plan. The police chief gets to pick and choose. He didn't address it. He didn't get his way when the report came out. Now he gets to pick and choose what he's going to support and what he's going to be opposed to. This is not what this process was supposed to be about. And I'm very bothered that here we are, we're being told that this is a rash decision at this point by the police chief, who is co-chair of this body, of this collaborative. And this was part of the work product of two different work groups, that were conclusions that were put in there. And he hasn't come up with an alternative. He's simply saying, no, what was in that plan? No, I don't want you to approve it. And that's the solution. We can't let this stand. We need to move forward with this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna hear from Mr. Igo, and then we'll get you Sergeant Alex Hanson.
Kelly, we did this whole collaborative and the plan came out of it, or whatever suggestions were made. And I'm just reading it again. And it says, one action is use of force. The use of chemical weapons such as tear gas should be restricted in heavily populated dense neighborhoods. And APD should look for additional safe and effective alternative measures. And according to this, they're saying it's going to take a little time. Okay, but now we want to ban it right away with no plan to go another way. And I'm been torn between this, because I think these protests started off as a very good thing. And, we're talking about escalate and de-escalation. Well, it sounds like a lot of outside agitators were trying to escalate this. Okay, and I was not there, but someone said there's Molotov cocktails, commercial fireworks. So it seemed like that got agitated, and it gets to the point for people, what do you do next? Now, they said that the tear gas, or whatever they want to call it, is supposed to create a safety barrier between the two, where the crowds were, where the police officers were. And when people started, Officer Hanson, okay, Officer Hanson, the guy that got hit in the head, still has a coma, or not a coma, a concussion. All these different things led. It's just like, it's just terrible. And all I keep thinking about is the stuff that happened in Washington. What are they going to do? How are they going to prepare for the future? How are we going to prepare for this again? And if we don't have something, and I don't know what it is, okay, and we have to come up with something. And if there's nothing better, maybe this has to stay in place for the few times that it has been used, and in certain neighborhoods, okay, densely populated. But I'm just back and forth, and I don't know. But the plan says we're supposed to look to alternative, and I do think we need one. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Igo. Okay, so I think we're at the end of comments and discussion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I make a
Mr. Hoey.
I make a motion that we pass this out of committee with a favorable recommendation. Thank you.
The second? Mr. Ballerin, you got your hand? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I want why I'm not seconding the motion.
What did you say?
wanted to state why I'm not seconding the motion.
Okay,
I mean, you're the chair.
yeah, so. Let's see, Mr. Ballerin. Do you mind if he speaks, Tom? I mean, there's a motion on the floor.
Do you want to say, would Sonia second it? I don't know, before.
Sorry, I had to step away.
I made a motion that we push this out of committee with a favorable recommendation, and nobody's seconding it. So
I second.
thank you. Now we can discuss.
Okay. Any discussion?
I got discussion. So I'd like to have the amendment to allow for use if there is a gunman or an individual barricaded situation. I think, you know, this just happened in my neighborhood a few weeks ago, few months ago, and it was a very scary few hours. And people were terrified that there would be a shootout, like I mentioned before. So I think this is a justifiable cause to prevent potential harm in our neighborhoods. That's what I like to see. I'd also like to see a plan from the APD, quite honest with you.
Mr. Ballerin, you broke on your response there for part of it, so we missed, or was it just me, or did he freeze?
I could still hear him. He wanted
Okay.
to make a modification to the local law.
Oh, yeah, no, I heard all that, I just, the tail end of it, where he broke. So, Ms. Doche, would you be amenable to allowing, making a modification and allowing for the use in those situations or in that circumstance that Mr. Ballerin just suggested?
I would rather have this go to the council for a vote as is.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Uh,
Taking a vote?
Yeah,
I'm
we
look-
will.
I'm looking for a plan and an alternative. That's what I
Yeah.
want. That's what the collaborative requested, and that's where I stand. So at this point, I will be voting.
Yeah, and I'm actually in agreement with Mr. Ballerin, because in that very circumstance, how do you resolve that issue? Again, my comments and my thoughts on all this stuff is from being there and being a part of some of this stuff. Not
Kelly?
again. Yes.
Kelly, you know, this tear gas it's like around World War II. Well, World War I was when they used the mustard, but police force using it was World War II. So there was hostage situations, you know, back in the 20s and 1910s. I mean, there was a crime of the century, and, you know, back then, I mean, this is the history of our country because we allow, you know, weapons and stuff like that. But what did they do back then? You know, and my feeling is, you know, somebody's barricaded in with a gun, you know, throwing tear gas to answer Councilman Ballerin, they might say, well, this is all over. I'm going to blow the person away. I think if you sat out there, if it takes 2 days, you sit outside the house, eventually the person's going to have to come out. Okay. There's different things. And, you know, the use of tear gas can cause a fire. And if it's an apartment house or there's people in there and they throw tear gas and the house goes on fire, I mean, we did it before. So I just got to throw that out there.
Mr. Ballerin.
If you were on the streets like I was that day and you spoke to the residents and you heard the fears that they had, you would understand why I'm asking for this. And I understand that, you know, people want a clean bill, but, you know, that's why we have these meetings, to have these conversations, to share each other's different perspectives and different experiences, so we can try to come up with a policy that is more fair to the different experiences individuals have had. So I really feel like I'm being, put in a real bad spot right now, and I'm kind of upset about that because this is something I support, and I'm meeting people 95% of the way, and I can't get that extra 5%. My recommendation is then going to be that I hope we can continue this conversation for another meeting. I don't want this to die here today, but I'd like for us to have further conversations so we can try to include everybody's viewpoint.
Yeah, so I happen to agree with Mr. Ballerin with the tabling, but at the same time, like I stated before, I don't know where I'm going to come down on this. I really have a problem with this, but I won't prevent a vote on the council with it. So I'll vote as a part of moving this forward out of committee, but again, I have some serious concerns and problems with this. I guess at this point we vote.
Disappointment. I want to be honest, because I'm really upset that we can't meet 5% on this. I feel like I think when you have these meetings, it's to come up with compromise. It's not to get everything that you want. And when someone's meeting you 95% of the way and they're asking you to meet me 5% based on my experiences, I think it's unfair to have someone's experiences ignored. So unfortunately, even though I'd like to see 95% of this approved, I feel that 5% should be heard.
Yeah. Okay, so Sonia.
Yeah. So I know where I stand on this and how I would vote on this. But prior to Councilmember Kimbrough, you saying that you would move this out of committee, we didn't have the vote. So Joe Igo, Alfredo, and you didn't seem, it seemed like you wanted more time to discuss, to have the police come back, shorter presentation, I hope. But with the plan and showing us what the alternative solutions is. I'm voting to ban this personally. But what I don't want to do is do a disservice to my fellow council members who simply want more time before deciding on a vote. So I would be amendable towards having a further discussion on this to make sure that we meet the needs of the council members.
Okay. So yeah, and just Ms. Doche, Mr. Ballerin asked for a slight change. I mean, that's a specific circumstance where it could be used. You can't, you want it the way it is. Is that correct?
So
You can speak.
what is the exact language that is being suggested?
What change to change and allow for usage in those special circumstances, meaning like barricaded subject and probably some other similar instances like that. I mean, we could do this and say it can't be used in protests or something. I mean, that there's because again,
So I'm familiar with the fact that sometimes legislation banning this only applies to people exercising First Amendment rights. And then the question becomes, who gets to decide when somebody is exercising First Amendment rights appropriately versus inappropriately. And when is it a First Amendment right and when isn't it a First Amendment right? It's subjective in the moment. So that's, I mean, the reason why I would prefer for it to be moved to the full council for a vote is because I think that, you know, we can tinker with nobody's really proposing specific language at this moment. So, you know, I'm being told, basically I'm being unreasonable because I'm not willing to go that 5%, but, you know, there's no language that tells me, I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, you know, what that 5% is. And until you have the language, you don't really know whether or not it's 5%. So I'm not putting anybody in an awkward position because there's no specific language on the table. There's no clear way of setting this out without being very clear. Because frankly, I've heard a lot today that is more disconcerting to me, but I guess not so surprising, regarding a predisposition, I think. And some of the history that I've seen in the last, 3-4 years, some of the incidents that we know about, it seems as though talk about rash decisions and escalation of violence against people of color. And that's why we're here. That's why we have the plan. That's why we have the report. And Mr. Igo cited language specifically from one of the work groups, and the other one contains no such caveats with regard to that. This particular legislation provides for there to be a policy developed with regard to this. It is a ban, but it allows for then the use of pepper spray in specific circumstances. I think that these discussions have been being had for a very long time, and the chief of police could have come forward with appropriate responses to what happened and appropriate potential modifications. But there is a lack of willingness to do that, because here we are 9 months after the collaborative was formed, and tonight is the first night that I'm hearing the police chief's position on this. I also do not buy 100% into the description of the events that we heard about on that night. I've heard alternatives. I've heard that people wanted to talk to certain people. And when we talk about de-escalation, there is a need for more talk. There is a need for doing more community policing, and we've had that be fully supported and watered down in the last several years. So people have had the opportunity to propose specific amendments, and now this is a way of, I want to say, kicking the can down the road when this has been a topic of discussion for 9 months or longer at this point. So I think the public deserves a vote at the full council. I think that's what they deserve. And I gotta say, I've been on the council for 7.5 years now, and it's always been the policy to push something out of committee with no recommendation if there is, when there's a divided committee and when it's an issue of significant importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Tom, after, we can't hear you, Sonia. Did you withdraw your second? I can't hear you, Sonia.
I like to hear from Tom. I was
Yeah.
talking myself.
Judy, and I'm for this. But I look at Alfredo, I see him torn. Could I suggest language that the only circumstance where tear gas can be used is be in an indoor hostage situation where no other alternative would be available? I'm just throwing that out there. I'm going to still, if you
That
don't agree with it.
That language I can live with. That's very narrow. I can live with it.
So I'd like to modify my motion to include with the amendment that tear gas can be only used indoors in a hostage situation when there would be no other alternative to save lives.
Can we also add the word where there's a gunman barricade?
Well, I'm saying a hostage situation. The gunman, he could be a hostage to himself.
They may be barricaded themselves in a home.
Judy, would that be okay if we added the gunman part where a gunman is like holed up in a hostage, or a situation where a gunman is holed up?
And I was gonna say, I think I said that, and I am not a lawyer, but I think part of the reasons we have these discussions is so that we can get the legal language worked out and then voted on.
Yeah.
So, I think when I expressed my concern, I expressed it pretty clearly on the merits.
Let me ask you a question. Could there be an outside hostage situation? What would you do then? Have to take the guy out with a shot instead of using tear gas?
Right, Joe. Okay, so that would be my concern also. My concerns are still my concern. So I mean, I'd be more worried about the massive amount of people outdoors and stuff going on than someone barricaded in a enclosed environment. But we're to the point where we're
it's 9:30.
we're voting.
4
Yeah,
hours.
we're voting. So, well, but you know what? This is one of those subjects and topics that if it took us to be here till midnight to get through it, it's that
Right, but
important.
there's 5 of us. There's another 10 that aren't here.
Right.
That's pretty bad too.
So,
well, I had pulled it back. Where are we right now? And
so your motion.
Yeah.
Your motion. You were modifying.
I had done it indoor. I can argue. I don't think it belongs outdoor. I'm sorry. I mean, we survived all these years without it outdoor. I don't think there's been any case where we had to use tear gas outdoors in order to save a hostage. Alfredo brought up a definite problem where there was a gunman they thought locked up inside with hostages, and that was his big concern. And trying to give that just a little bit, that line, I wanted to do that. But my language would be, and I'm asking JR to, I guess make the change and maybe repeat it, but would be that no, tear gas is banned, and the only use would be in an indoor hostage or gunman situation where no other alternative would be available to de-escalate the problem or the situation.
So are you amending your motion that was? on
Yes,
the
I said it
floor?
before that I amended it.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I get the language, and I'll ask somebody to second it if they wouldn't mind.
Can I just, I think Alfredo's issue was a hostage situation where where the person has a gun. Is
Correct.
that?
Yeah.
So Because you said a hostage
We wouldn't use it.
situation or a gunman.
Well, he wanted a gunman added in because, go ahead.
I kind of want to make sure we're doing this right. So this was brought up during the presentation. So I kind of like to hear how, you know, how it's used and, you know, because they were on the ground. So can someone from APT please answer how you would do this if you had a hostage situation or you had a person barricaded? I saw how you did it in my neighborhood. So I want to get an idea of how it's done so we can have an idea of what we're voting on, a little more clearer.
Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I just want to add, with all due respect to the authority of the council with this, if there are going to be some exceptions made to this, it's probably wise to have some input at this point from the experts and from some of the officers and commanders who are actually using this in the field in terms of the terminology and in the actual application in circumstances. That's all I would ask at this point.
Okay, Mr. Ballerin, was that helpful? Because if not, we can just go ahead.
And Kelly, can I just add one more thing also? Just the last thing. And yes, the police department has a plan. We have a standard operating procedure that outlines exactly when these chemical munitions can be used, the de-escalation piece of it, and the authority to use it. We have that SOP already in place. And so it's been asked of me a couple of times during this presentation. And yes, we do have that. We can produce that. So a plan is in place. Now, there's obviously an appetite to have some more input from other stakeholders as to if their plan should stay the same, should it be totally thrown out, or should there be some modifications to that? My suggestion would be that there be some modifications to the plan that we already have in place.
Kelly, if I can just say, we adopted the plan. The chief had a lot of opportunity for input into that plan. I think Alfredo was talking about a hostage situation with a gunman. No alternative is available. I think that's sufficient for you to pass this out of committee at this point. And I do want to note that this legislation provides that regulations will be adopted and that it will be presented to the Community Police Review Board, that policy. So those kind of details can be worked out then. I also want to note that we all the time pass legislation out with the intent being clear, and then JR works the specific language on it. I think that we are clear about the concept, and I don't think that there's a need for further delay.
Thank you, Judy. Alfredo, and then we'll move on. We're moving forward.
Those that are involved with those tactics were here, so we could have had those conversations here, presently. I would like the wording, and wording is very important because that's what gets on the final document and what gets, that it be not just past this situation, but a gun person. You could be either a gun person who has barricaded themselves in a dangerous dangerous environment. I think that's probably the language I would feel more comfortable with.
Okay, so we still had
Motion on
the,
the floor.
excuse me?
Is there still a motion on the floor? Has it been
Yeah.
recalled or what?
No, Tom amended his first motion and that's where we were, and we were discussing that.
Okay, so that's not an issue or a motion right now. Because if it's not, I'm gonna make a motion to table it for further discussion.
We have an open motion here.
Well, that's what I
Right, yeah,
just asked.
so- right,
voted up
so,
or down.
so Tom's motion, second on the motion?
Before I say yes, can you explain exactly what the motion is? Are we taking Alfredo's recent comment? Are we taking the prior language? Like, it's not clear to me.
So Tom, can you go from start to finish, restate the motion and,
Sure, and I'll try to get in what it changes. That we passed this out of committee, but the ban would not include a gunman or a hostage situation. And I'm gonna continue with a closed environment, within a closed environment.
okay, it's second on the motion.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Fredericks, a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No,
Okay, so I said, Joe, you were no, Tom's a no, Alfredo?
Oh, I said yes.
Oh, Tom's a yes, Alfredo's a no. And, oh, this is just too much. I'm a yes for moving ahead with it.
Dangerous environment. I don't think it should be enclosed. I don't think it should just be an enclosed situation. I think if someone's in the backyard and they're creating potential dangerous environment, we should take action in a dangerous environment. And I'm hoping we can get that in the final piece.
So the motion passes, so it's moved out to the council, larger council with a positive recommendation. Judy, can you apply and insert Mr. Ballerin's requests, his changes? Well, I mean, we're done, we're past it, so the motion already passed, but
Before you answer, Judy, I would also be okay with Alfredo's addition there.
So I think Alfredo was intending this not to be an open air situation, but a barricaded situation, maybe in a backyard or something. I think that is that the intent?
but in the backyard, you're not barricaded, you're outside, so
Well,
it'll travel any gas.
I think if there's a gunman in someone's backyard and you're trying to get that person out, I think keeping it in a dangerous environment gives it a more broader appeal. Because the last thing you want is someone to run into the backyard, think, oh, they can't get me inside. So if we can get that language in, then I can feel comfortable voting for it on the floor when it comes to the council. I didn't want to hold it up back and forth in debate. We've had enough.
right. So I will talk to JR and see if we can work on some floor amendment.
Okay, so just before we adjourn, if you really think about all this, what's going on here really revolves around trust of the police. I'm looking at the Facebook posts and it's blown up. I don't know if Chief, you or your staff are looking at some of the comments. It's really what it boils down to. And of course, the collaborative is meant to rebuild relationships, build trust and all of that stuff. So I mean, we got a lot of work to do because really it's the overriding issue is trust. And so we got to take the steps we need to overcome that or make that better. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn.
Second. All right.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Rogers, the second, all in favor, aye. We're adjourned. It's a marathon.
Thank you, folks.